constantly minimizing your accomplishments. There's a silent way people sabotage themselves every single day, and they don't even realize they're doing it. It hides behind the mask of humility. It sounds like modesty. It presents itself as being polite, grounded, or low maintenance, but behind it lies a much deeper fracture, one that whispers, "You're still not enough." When you constantly brush off praise, when you wave away compliments with a nervous laugh or say things like, "It was nothing," even after sleepless nights and relentless work, you're not just being humble. You're unconsciously training yourself to believe that your accomplishments mean little, that you yourself don't matter much. This isn't modesty, this is self-erasure, and it's one of the most dangerous red flags in your personal psychology. Often, this behavior takes root early. Maybe you grew up in a home where achievements were only recognized if they were extraordinary. Maybe you were taught that expressing pride was arrogance, or maybe, just maybe, you learned that shrinking yourself made you safer, less of a target, less too much for others to handle. So now, as an adult, you find it hard, sometimes even painful, to celebrate your own growth. When the spotlight swings your way, you dodge it. You laugh off hard-earned success. You turn moments of triumph into awkward silence. You're the one who downplays a promotion, a breakthrough, a victory you bled for. And worst of all, you start to believe that you didn't really deserve it. The damage is subtle but devastating. You walk through life feeling unfulfilled, even when others admire you. You reach milestone after milestone, yet internally, nothing ever feels like enough. You crave appreciation, but when it comes, you reject it. It becomes a loop. Achieve, downplay, feel hollow, rinse, repeat. Over time, that small lie, that you're only valuable when you're humble, becomes a core identity, one that tells you your light is only acceptable if it's dim, one that convinces you that standing tall makes you arrogant, one that says visibility equals danger, and if you don't stop it, that lie becomes your cage. Because the truth is, minimizing your accomplishments doesn't make you noble. It makes you invisible. It teaches your brain that your hard work isn't worth recognizing. It teaches others that you don't need appreciation. And it teaches your soul that you're not allowed to take up space. You are. And until you believe that, nothing will ever feel real. A persistent need for external validation. Now flip the coin. On the opposite end of self-minimization is a desperate thirst for something that never quite quenches. External validation. It starts quietly, maybe with a compliment that lights you up, a like on your post, an approving nod from someone you admire, but over time it becomes something more, something you rely on, something you need. And then, without even noticing, you start to feel like you can't breathe without it. Praise becomes oxygen. Recognition becomes a lifeline. Approval becomes your mirror. And the absence of it feels like suffocating. You start chasing it. Not because you're arrogant, but because somewhere along the line you learned that love, attention, and even safety were conditional. You learned to read the room before you entered. You became who others needed you to be. You shape-shifted, pleased, smiled when it hurt, agreed when you didn't, and abandoned yourself just to be chosen. This red flag isn't about vanity, it's about survival. Because for you, disapproval doesn't just sting, it threatens your sense of self. So now you find yourself constantly checking, was that okay? Did they like me? Was I too much? You replay conversations, obsess over reactions, interpret silence as rejection. You look to others to tell you who you are, and every time someone approves of you, you feel a temporary high, but it fades. It always fades, and you're back chasing it again. You forget what your own voice sounds like. You stop asking what you want and start asking what will be liked. And the most dangerous part, you start picking paths in life, not because they fulfill you, but because they're applauded. You build a life of mirrors, reflections of other people's desires, while your own remains buried beneath layers of performance. You are not a performance. You are not someone else's projection. And until you stop chasing validation, you'll never feel whole, because you're trying to fill a void that only self-acceptance can satisfy. Over-apologizing, even when not at fault. I'm sorry. It slips out before you can stop it. You say it when you bump into someone, when you speak your mind, when someone else hurts you. You apologize for things you didn't do, for things that aren't wrong, for simply existing in someone's space. And this isn't just a habit, this is a trauma response. This is the learned behavior of someone who equated peace with self-blame. You learned that if you took the blame, you could avoid conflict. If you absorbed the guilt, maybe they'd calm down. Maybe they'd stop yelling. Maybe they'd love you again. So now, you apologize not to make things right, but to make yourself small. This kind of apologizing chips away at your core. It teaches your mind that you're always wrong. It sends the message that your presence is intrusive, your needs are too much, and your opinions aren't worth expressing. You apologize for taking up space. You apologize for saying no. You apologize for existing too loudly. And as this pattern repeats, you disappear, not in body but in spirit. People start expecting you to bend, to shrink, to yield. They begin treating you as if you truly are the problem, and eventually you believe it too. But here's the truth. You don't need to apologize for having needs. You don't need to shrink to make others comfortable. You deserve to take up space, fully, unapologetically. Chronic indecisiveness, even over small matters. You stare at a menu, paralyzed. You write and rewrite a message before sending it. You ask everyone else what they think before you consider what you feel. This isn't just indecision. This is the aftermath of punishment for choosing wrong. You weren't allowed to trust your own instincts. Maybe your choices were mocked. Maybe you were constantly corrected. Maybe when you followed your gut, it led to pain, and that pain taught you. Don't choose. It's safer that way. Now every decision, no matter how small, feels monumental. You spiral over the tiniest things because your nervous system has been conditioned to fear being wrong. And so you delay, hesitate, second-guess, doubt. And it's not because you don't know what you want. It's because somewhere inside you, you're still seeking permission to want it. You've been trained to believe that your choices don't matter, or worse, that your choices will be used against you. So instead of deciding, you freeze, because at least if you don't choose, you can't be blamed. But in trying to avoid the wrong decision, you end up making none at all. And that too is a decision, with consequences just as heavy. You have a right to choose. You have a right to get it wrong. And most of all, you have a right to trust yourself again. Feeling emotionally drained. After every interaction, there are people who drain you, not because you're weak, but because being around them demands a version of you that isn't real. And if every time you interact with someone, you walk away feeling empty, tired, or anxious, that's not normal. That's a red flag waving in your nervous system. These aren't just difficult people. These are emotional vampires. They monopolize the conversation. They belittle you with jokes. They expect you to manage their emotions while disregarding yours. They force you to shrink, to walk on eggshells, to become someone else entirely just to keep the peace. You filter your words, you laugh at things that don't feel right. You anticipate their moods like weather forecasts. And in the process, you disappear. Eventually, you associate their presence with stress, even if you can't explain why. You dread the call. You breathe a little easier when they leave. And yet, you keep showing up. Why? Because you've been taught to mistake emotional survival for connection. Because part of you still believes that managing others' comfort is your responsibility. But it's not. You don't need to be anyone's emotional sponge. You don't need to sacrifice your energy for the illusion of peace. True connection doesn't drain you. It energizes you. And anything less than that isn't love. It's self-abandonment dressed as loyalty. All these red flags, minimizing your wins, needing validation, over-apologizing, fearing choices, feeling drained, are not your fault. But they are your responsibility to heal. Because you are not here to survive your life. You are here to live it, fully, boldly, and unapologetically. Fear of success as much as fear of failure. Fearing success as much as failure is one of the most overlooked yet damaging psychological red flags. It's not just about doubting your abilities. It's about subconsciously believing that achieving your goals will cost you more than failing ever could. While fear of failure is widely acknowledged and even expected, the fear of success hides in plain sight, cloaked in procrastination, perfectionism, and avoidance. You might tell yourself that you're just waiting for the right moment, that you're refining the details, but in truth, You're terrified of what will happen if you actually make it, because in your past, success wasn't just a win, it came with strings. Maybe when you succeeded, the people around you changed, expectations rose, jealousy surfaced. You felt pressure to perform again and again and again, until achievement no longer brought joy, only anxiety. You learned that being seen could be dangerous, that being great meant carrying burdens you never asked for. So now you hesitate. You talk yourself out of your own momentum. You start projects with fire but never finish them. Not because you're lazy or unmotivated, but because your brain has linked success with stress, pressure, isolation, and vulnerability. You fear being trapped by your own progress, constantly climbing with no end in sight. So you keep yourself safely in the realm of almost ready, almost done, almost there. Because if you win, what will it cost? Your peace, your relationships, your freedom? That quiet fear whispers, maybe staying small is safer. Believing you're a burden for expressing emotions, the belief that you're a burden for simply feeling, is one of the most quietly devastating psychological wounds a person can carry. It's not just that you struggle to talk about your emotions, it's that somewhere deep down you've convinced yourself your feelings are an inconvenience, that your sadness is selfish, your anger is dangerous, and your pain makes you unlovable. So you hide it, you bury it, you smile through heartbreak, and apologize for needing basic emotional support. This belief often takes root in early environments where emotional honesty was punished, ignored, or ridiculed. You may have been told to stop crying, to toughen up, to stop being dramatic, or worse, your emotions may have been used against you, manipulated, mocked, or turned into ammunition in someone else's battle. So you learned, silence is safety, vulnerability is risk. You crafted a mask that made everyone else comfortable, even if it suffocated you. Now, you minimize your needs, flinch when you're asked how you feel, and immediately regret opening up even to the people who love you. And when someone finally sees your pain, you feel guilt instead of relief. You fear being seen as weak or needy, so you rush to reassure, to apologize, to shut it all down. But beneath that performance is a person starving for connection, aching to be held without judgment. You are not too much. Your emotions are not a burden. But until you believe that, you'll keep locking yourself in a prison built by other people's discomfort with your truth. Guilt for relaxing or taking breaks. Guilt for resting isn't just a bad habit, it's a trauma response, a learned belief that rest equals failure. It convinces you that slowing down is weakness, that you're only as valuable as your output, and that every moment not spent being productive is a moment wasted. This isn't hustle, this is self-destruction dressed up as drive. You try to relax, but your body won't let you. Your mind races, your chest tightens, and a familiar voice creeps in. You should be doing more. That guilt didn't come from nowhere. You were likely raised in an environment where love was conditional on performance, where rest was seen as laziness and praise was only given when you were achieving. Maybe you learned that being enough meant always being useful, always grinding, always sacrificing your peace to earn approval. Now, even when you have time to rest, you can't fully enjoy it. Watching a movie, you feel restless. Taking a break, you're haunted by what you're not doing. On vacation, you secretly check emails because stillness makes you feel irresponsible. You've internalized the idea that your worth is transactional, earned only through exhaustion. But the truth is, this isn't strength, it's burnout. It's a system of thinking that dehumanizes you and robs you of joy. You deserve to rest, not as a reward but as a right. Not because you've suffered enough, but because you're human. Until you stop seeing rest as a luxury and start seeing it as a necessity, you'll keep running on empty, never realizing the life you're burning yourself out to build is one you never get to fully live. Thinking others are always mad at you without evidence. Believing that people are upset with you, even when there's no clear reason, is a painful form of emotional hypervigilance. It's not just anxiety, it's a learned survival mechanism. You're constantly scanning for tension, decoding texts, reading between the lines, bracing for conflict that hasn't even happened. And the worst part is, you blame yourself every time. You assume you're the problem before anyone has even spoken. This kind of emotional paranoia, usually develops in chaotic or emotionally unstable environments. Maybe you were raised around people whose moods shifted without warning. Maybe you had to tiptoe through relationships where approval was always just out of reach, and love felt conditional. So you became the peacekeeper, the overthinker, the one who always tried to make it better, even when it wasn't your job. Now, even in safe relationships, your nervous system is stuck in that old loop. A late reply, you panic. A short message, you spiral. Someone's quiet. You convince yourself they secretly hate you. You prepare apologies for offenses you didn't commit, and you never ask for clarity because you're terrified the answer might confirm your worst fear, that you're too much, too needy, too difficult. But this isn't emotional intelligence, it's self-abandonment. The real issue isn't what others feel about you. It's that deep down, you don't feel emotionally safe. You've been wired to expect rejection, so now you see it everywhere. Healing starts when you stop assuming disconnection means danger and start realizing that not everything is about you, and that not everything that is about you is your fault. Being uncomfortable when praised. Feeling uncomfortable when praised is more than humility. It's a deep-seated rejection of your own worth. Compliments don't land. They bounce off you like you're made of Teflon. Someone acknowledges your effort and you instantly deflect. It was nothing. I just got lucky. Anyone could have done it. You minimize your shine before anyone else gets the chance to, but this isn't modesty. It's a wound. A wound formed in environments where praise felt unsafe. Maybe it was rare and conditional. Maybe it came with pressure to perform again, to be even better. Maybe it felt manipulative, like praise was just another way to control or compare you. So now, even when the world sees your brilliance, you feel like a fraud. Compliments feel like lies, and your instinct is to shrink instead of receive. It's not that you don't want to be appreciated, it's that deep down, you don't believe you deserve it. And so you rob yourself of joy. You achieve something incredible, then rush past it like it didn't happen. You work hard, create beauty, move mountains, and then you immediately move the goalpost. You've built a life where recognition feels more threatening than failure, because praise forces you to confront a truth you're not ready to accept, that you are enough, just as you are. Until you learn to hold space for your own value, every well done will feel like a mistake, and every moment of being seen will feel like something you have to survive rather than celebrate. Intense discomfort with silence in conversations. The fear of silence in conversation often goes far deeper than mere awkwardness. For some, every pause, every lull in dialogue triggers a wave of anxiety so subtle yet so overwhelming that silence becomes unbearable. It's not just about keeping the chat going. It's about survival. Each second of quiet feels like standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting for the fall. If no one's speaking, the mind begins to race with assumptions. Did I say something wrong? Are they bored? Are they angry? Have I been rejected? You begin to feel like the absence of sound is an accusation. This discomfort is rarely random. It often traces back to early experiences where silence was loaded, not with calm, but with tension. Maybe you grew up in an environment where the silence of a parent meant punishment was coming. Maybe emotional withdrawal was used as control, and quiet wasn't safety, but a storm about to break. You learned to fear stillness. You learned that talking, performing, pleasing, these were your shields. So now you become the overtalker, the entertainer, the explainer. You leap to fill every pause with jokes, stories, explanations, anything to keep the silence away. And yet it's exhausting. You walk away from conversations drained, questioning if you said too much, feeling like you gave pieces of yourself just to avoid the unbearable void. But conversations aren't meant to be non-stop noise. Silence isn't the enemy. It's the breath between words, the space where true connection settles. But if silence once meant being forgotten or punished, you may now fear it like danger. And until that fear is named and healed, every moment of quiet will feel like a threat, not a rest. Sabotaging things when they're going well. Self-sabotage is one of the most insidious psychological patterns. When things start to go well, when love begins to feel real, when projects gain traction, when peace finally seems within reach, a switch flips. And instead of relaxing into that goodness, you pull away. You make an offhand joke that hurts someone close. You miss a deadline. You pick a fight over something minor. You ghost someone who matters to you. And you tell yourself it's logical and you're protecting your peace, trusting your gut, or avoiding boredom. But really, it's fear in disguise. For many, this red flag begins in childhoods marked by instability, trauma, or emotional unpredictability. If every time things felt good, pain followed soon after, your body learns to fear joy. Goodness becomes suspicious. Calm feels like the silence before the storm. So instead of waiting for disappointment to arrive, you rush to cause it yourself. It's a form of control. If I end it now, I won't be blindsided later. You might even believe you're unworthy of sustained happiness. Deep down you may think you don't deserve love that stays, success that grows, or peace that lasts. So you destroy what's working before it can prove you wrong. And every time you do, it confirms the lie. See? I told you it wouldn't last. This pattern doesn't just affect relationships. It creeps into your ambitions, your health, your creativity. It's a cycle of building and breaking, hoping and fearing, dreaming and retreating. And the tragedy is that you often deeply want the very things you're pushing away. But until you recognize that safety doesn't always mean sabotage is coming, you'll keep confusing growth with danger and comfort with chaos. Feeling responsible for others' emotions. Carrying the emotional weight of others is a burden that can slowly erode your sense of self. It's not just empathy, it's hyper-responsibility. If someone around you is upset, angry, withdrawn, or hurting, you feel it's your fault, or at the very least your job to fix it. You become hyper-attuned to tone, body language, facial expressions, scanning constantly for signs that something is off, so you can jump into action. You become the emotional caretaker, the buffer, the fixer. This often stems from environments in childhood where emotional safety was inconsistent. Maybe a parent's mood determined whether the house was peaceful or explosive. Maybe you learned that love was conditional based on how well you managed other people's feelings. You were trained to be the peacekeeper, to tiptoe through emotional minefields, to soothe adults who should have been soothing you. Now, as an adult, you instinctively apologize for things you didn't cause. You avoid bringing up your own needs or truths because you fear the ripple effect. You hesitate to express discomfort, anger, or even joy if you think it might disturb someone else's state. Relationships become exhausting performances of emotional management where your focus is always external and your own emotional life stays buried. The cruel irony is this: while you're constantly managing everyone else's feelings, your own go unheard, unseen, unmet. You lose touch with what you want, how you feel, what you need. You begin to confuse love with self-abandonment, care with control, connection with sacrifice. And healing starts when you realize you are not responsible for the emotional weather of others. You are only responsible for your own. Difficulty receiving compliments without deflecting. It's easy to confuse deflecting compliments with humility, but in truth, it's often a red flag of deeper self-worth struggles. When someone compliments you, your appearance, your work, your character, your instinct might be to brush it off, laugh it away, minimize it, or redirect the praise. "Oh, it was nothing," you say, or "you too." You turn a moment of recognition into discomfort. And this isn't about modesty, it's about internal dissonance. This pattern often comes from years of conditioning. Perhaps compliments were rare or felt manipulative, used to control or reward behavior. Maybe they came with pressure. "You're so smart," followed by crushing expectations. Or maybe you were taught that accepting praise made you arrogant, self-absorbed, or fake. Over time, admiration stopped feeling like affirmation and started feeling like danger. Now, when someone sees something good in you, it clashes with the voice in your head, the voice that says you're mediocre, undeserving, not enough. So you reject the compliment not out of grace but out of disbelief. You think, they don't know the real me. You fear that accepting kindness will expose you as a fraud. But in doing this, you deny yourself the nourishment of being seen. You train yourself to reject love, even when it's freely given. And the more you do this, the more you reinforce the false belief that your worth must always be earned, that validation must always be proven. Healing this means learning to sit in that discomfort, to say thank you and nothing else, to let the warmth of kind words settle in your bones. You are not unworthy of praise, you are simply not used to it. But you can learn to let it in. Laughing or smiling when talking about traumatic events. There is something profoundly haunting about smiling through the retelling of pain. To the untrained eye, it can look like strength, like someone who's made peace with the past. But that laugh, that smirk, that casual tone, it's not healing, it's hiding. It's what the body does when the heart isn't ready to fully feel the weight of the trauma it's carrying. This red flag is especially common in people who grew up in environments where emotional expression was unsafe or unwelcome. Maybe showing sadness was met with ridicule, or crying made you a target. Maybe you learned that staying composed, even humorous, was the only way to be heard or survive. So now when you speak of abandonment, betrayal, abuse, or grief, you do so with a grin, as if it's just a story, as if it didn't almost break you. The truth is that laughter is armor, that smile is a wall. It's the nervous system's way of keeping a safe distance from memories that are still too raw to fully process. If you joke, you don't have to feel. If you laugh, you don't have to relive it. And for many, this becomes a habit, a coping mechanism so ingrained that even they don't realize they're doing it. But beneath the humor is a truth that hasn't been held, a wound that hasn't been named, a part of you still frozen in time, still waiting for someone to say it's okay to not be okay. When someone laughs while speaking about trauma, it's not a sign of healing, it's a sign of protection. And what they need is not laughter in return, but safety, space, and permission to feel what they never got to. Being hyper-aware of people's moods. Being hyper-aware of people's moods isn't a gift, it's a defense mechanism that developed in the shadows of instability. It may feel like intuition, but in truth, it's a trauma response, one born from unpredictability, from having to gauge danger before it showed itself. You walk into a room and your senses switch on like radar. You scan every micro-expression, every pause, every sigh, not because you're curious, but because your safety feels like it depends on it. A neutral face isn't just neutral. It's a mystery to decode, a riddle that might hold rejection, anger, or disapproval. You didn't choose this. It was wired into you by environments where emotional whiplash was the norm. Maybe love came with conditions. Maybe affection was offered as bait, only to be yanked away when you needed it most. Or perhaps rage erupted out of nowhere, making silence a threat rather than a peace. So you became a watcher, a quiet analyzer, always on edge. You weren't learning to connect, you were learning to survive. Now, in adulthood, you find it impossible to untangle your emotions from those around you. Someone's bad mood becomes your fault. Their cold tone becomes your trigger. Their distance becomes a silent accusation. And so, without realizing it, you take ownership of every emotional shift in the room. Not because you're responsible, but because your nervous system has been conditioned to believe you are. This hypervigilance is not empathy. It's a survival script written by fear. You shapeshift, people-please, and decode constantly. Not out of compassion, but out of desperation for safety. But the tragedy is that in trying to keep the peace, you end up abandoning yourself. You suppress your needs to stabilize others. You forget what calm actually feels like. And worst of all, you mistake emotional tension for love. Because when you grow up in chaos, stability feels suspicious, and stillness feels like the calm before a storm. Constantly rehearsing. Conversations in your head. Rehearsing conversations over and over isn't just overthinking, it's self-protection in disguise. It's your brain trying to armor itself against pain, judgment, or rejection before it even has a chance to happen. You replay past conversations obsessively, searching for a word, a phrase, a pause that might have gone wrong. You write mental scripts for future interactions, down to the tone, facial expression, and imagined outcome. You aren't planning to connect. You're rehearsing how to survive being misunderstood. This red flag often comes from being silenced, from growing up in places where honesty wasn't welcomed, or where speaking your truth earned you punishment instead of understanding. Maybe you were told your feelings were dramatic. Maybe you were laughed at, gaslit, or simply ignored. So now, every word you say feels like a risk. Every sentence must be perfect, safe, palatable. You don't speak to express, you speak to avoid damage. You become a master editor of yourself. In your head, you're eloquent, clear, confident. But in real life, you hesitate. You dilute your truth. You say yes when you mean no, and you soften your needs so they don't feel like burdens. Because deep down, you're not looking for connection, you're looking for control. And the moment something unscripted happens, you spiral. This mental loop drains you. You spend more time inside imaginary conversations than real ones. You become a performer rather than a participant in your life. And while it may look like caution on the outside, it's actually fear. Fear that being fully yourself will lead to pain. But here's the truth. Rehearsed safety isn't the same as real connection. And until you allow yourself to speak messy, unpolished truth, you'll never know what it feels like to be truly heard. Extreme discomfort with ambiguity or uncertainty. When uncertainty feels like a threat instead of a challenge, it's not just a preference for planning, it's a trauma response. This red flag shows up in subtle, socially acceptable ways. Obsessively organizing your day, triple-checking messages, needing immediate answers, over-researching every minor decision. But beneath the productivity lies panic. To you, I don't know, doesn't sound neutral. It sounds dangerous. This discomfort usually begins in environments where unpredictability meant danger. Perhaps you grew up in chaos, where moods changed without warning, where promises were broken, where you had to anticipate storms without any forecast. So your nervous system learned the unknown is where the pain hides, and from that moment on, certainty became your drug. Now even small unknowns, like waiting for a text or not knowing weekend plans, can send your mind spinning. You imagine worst-case scenarios not to prepare, but to feel in control. You ask for reassurance not because you're weak, but because ambiguity feels like falling without a net. Every open-ended situation becomes a problem to solve, not an experience to feel. But this control comes at a cost. You trade curiosity for anxiety, spontaneity for rigidity, joy for safety. You become afraid to risk, afraid to rest, afraid to trust the unfolding. And the more you cling to certainty, the more trapped you feel. Because life is fluid, people are unpredictable, and the peace you're chasing can't be found in answers. It's found in learning to sit with the questions. Getting attached. Too quickly in relationships. Falling fast in relationships isn't about romance, it's about hunger. When you attach quickly, it's not just that you're smitten, it's that your heart is starving. You don't just like someone, you emotionally merge with them. You imagine a future after a few conversations. You feel safe just because someone noticed you. But underneath that intensity is a history of emotional deprivation. This kind of fast attachment often comes from childhood wounds where love was rare, conditional, or unstable. You learned that when affection appears, you better cling to it, because it might vanish any second. So now even a small sign of interest feels like a lifeline. You latch on, not because you fully know the person, but because being wanted feels like air to lungs that have been gasping for years. You ignore red flags. You rationalize their flaws. You mold yourself into who they want just to keep them close. You mistake intensity for connection. And when they pull away or things fall apart, it's not just heartbreak, it's devastation. Because they weren't just a person, they were proof you could be loved. But love that arrives like a rescue mission is rarely stable. And when you're searching for someone to complete you, you lose your sense of self in the process. True connection requires time, boundaries, and space. And until you learn to feel whole without someone else, you'll keep mistaking emotional highs for healthy love, feeling empty or numb. Frequently, emotional numbness doesn't shout, it silences. It's not the chaos of panic or the sharp sting of grief. It's the dull, low hum of nothing, the absence of feeling. You wake up without desire. You go through your day in grayscale. You smile on cue, laugh when expected, but inside you feel like a ghost, detached, disconnected, hollow. This numbness is often the body's last resort after years of emotional overload. When you've carried too much pain for too long, without release, without rest, without recognition, your system doesn't fight anymore. It shuts down. It protects you the only way it knows how, by turning off the volume on every emotion, even the good ones. You stop feeling joy. Sadness doesn't sting. Anger doesn't rise. Love doesn't reach you. You aren't broken, you're burned out. It's not that you don't care, it's that caring feels like too much. You've learned to suppress everything, just to survive. But in numbing the pain, you also numb the pleasure. And life begins to feel like a play you're watching, not living. What makes this state so insidious is how normal it can look. From the outside, you're functional, polite, maybe even successful. But inside you feel excruciatingly alone, not because you're isolated, but because nothing reaches you. And worst of all, you start believing it's permanent, that you'll never feel deeply again. But that numbness isn't the end. It's a message. A whisper from deep within your nervous system saying, I'm tired, I'm overloaded. I need gentleness, not more pressure. I need presence, not performance. And when you begin to listen, really listen, you'll realize that even in the silence, your healing has already begun. Equating love with sacrifice or suffering. Equating love with sacrifice or suffering is one of the most heartbreaking psychological red flags, not because it's loud or obvious, but because it disguises itself as commitment. It tells you that real love means staying through anything, no matter how painful, that you prove your loyalty by how much you can tolerate, how deeply you can bend without breaking. It convinces you that true affection is earned through endurance, through bleeding silently, through compromising your needs again and again, all in the name of love. This mindset usually takes root in early relationships where affection came at a cost. Maybe you were taught that love was conditional, doled out as a reward when you were obedient, quiet, or convenient. Maybe those who claimed to love you also hurt you, and the line between warmth and harm became blurred. Over time, pain became familiar, even comforting, because it was paired with the only kind of love you knew. So now, as an adult, you find yourself gravitating toward emotionally unavailable people, toxic dynamics and relationships that mirror that same imbalance. When it hurts, you take it as a sign that the love is real, that the depth of the suffering reflects the depth of your connection. But this isn't love. It's trauma echoing through your heart. It's survival instincts dressed as loyalty. Real love doesn't demand your self-erasure. It doesn't thrive on your silence or need you to suffer to prove your worth. Until you unlearn that pain is the price of affection, you'll continue mistaking survival for intimacy and calling it home. Needing to be needed to feel worthy. Needing to be needed to feel worthy is a red flag that hides beneath the mask of kindness. On the surface, it appears generous, nurturing, even admirable. You're the one people rely on, the one who always shows up, who always says yes. But beneath that surface lies a quiet desperation, a belief that your value only exists when someone else is depending on you. This psychological pattern often starts early, as in homes where love wasn't freely given, but was earned through usefulness. You may have learned that the only way to stay connected was to serve, to anticipate needs, to fix problems, to shrink yourself to keep the peace. Being helpful became your identity, and over time you forgot how to separate your worth from your usefulness. Now, even as an adult, you find yourself drawn to people who are broken, chaotic, or emotionally dependent, because helping them gives you purpose. If no one needs you, you feel invisible. If someone becomes independent, you feel rejected. This constant giving, though praised by others, can become a form of self-neglect. You push your own needs aside, swallow your struggles, and wear your exhaustion like a badge of honor. But deep down, you're terrified to ask the question, who am I if I'm not rescuing someone? The truth is, worth doesn't come from being needed. It comes from simply being. And until you believe that you are lovable even when you're not fixing, saving, or doing, you'll continue to confuse being essential with being enough. Hating being alone, even briefly. Hating being alone even briefly isn't about preferring company. It's about fearing your own presence. It's that sinking feeling in your chest when the room is silent, the way the walls feel like they're closing in when there's no one to talk to, and the restless urge to escape, not from others but from yourself. To those around you, it may look like you're extroverted, social, full of life. But the truth is more painful. Solitude feels like abandonment. This emotional response often comes from a history of being left alone when you needed love the most, when your pain went unnoticed, your feelings invalidated, or your presence ignored. Being alone meant being forgotten, and that fear has stayed with you. Now in your adult life, you fill every space with noise, texts, calls, plans, distractions, because stillness feels threatening. You jump into relationships too quickly. You dread weekends with no plans. You feel a strange kind of panic when you're not talking to someone, because when no one is around, your mind begins to speak, and what it says often hurts. But the problem isn't the silence. It's what it reveals. It brings forward all the unprocessed grief, the buried shame, the parts of yourself you've avoided. And that's the real fear, facing yourself without armor. But until you learn to sit with your own presence, you'll keep mistaking connection for safety and loneliness for danger. The truth is, healing begins when solitude stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like peace. Compulsively checking your appearance or behavior. Compulsively checking your appearance or behavior isn't just a matter of self-consciousness. It's a form of emotional survival. It's not vanity that makes you glance at every mirror, fix your posture, replay conversations in your head, or obsess over how you came across. It's fear, a deeply wired belief that if you don't appear just right, you won't be accepted, or worse, you'll be rejected. This internalized pressure often stems from environments where you were judged, scrutinized, or emotionally punished for being too loud, too quiet, too different, too much, or not enough. You learned early on that your safety depended on performance, on being polished, pleasing, and mistake-free. So now, even in spaces where no one is judging you, you still feel watched. You monitor yourself in real time. You wonder if you laughed too loud, said something awkward, or if people noticed your flaws. Social situations become performances, and authenticity starts to feel risky. Even when people compliment you, you struggle to believe them, because your self-worth has been outsourced to their opinions. But this relentless self-monitoring robs you of freedom. You lose the ability to be spontaneous, to speak freely, to exist without a filter. You become a version of yourself that's curated for safety, not connection. And eventually you begin to forget what it feels like to just be, unobserved, uncorrected, and unafraid. Real peace comes not from perfecting your reflection, but from accepting that you were never meant to be flawless, only real. Reluctance to share joy for fear it will be jinxed. Reluctance to share joy for fear it will be jinxed is more than just a quirky superstition. It's a defense mechanism rooted in disappointment, heartbreak, and stolen hope. It's the way your smile falters as you share good news, the hesitation before celebrating, the inner voice that whispers, "Don't get too excited. This won't last." You might follow happiness with knock on wood, or laugh nervously after mentioning something you're proud of, not because you're modest, but because you're bracing for the fall. This belief often grows from experiences where joy was temporary, where hope was met with loss, or where opening your heart led to heartbreak. Maybe you were taught that good things always come with a catch. Maybe you were met with envy, criticism, or silence when you shared something beautiful. So you learned to protect yourself, not by avoiding happiness, but by distrusting it. Now you keep your wins quiet. You downplay your excitement. You delay joy, thinking that if you don't fully let it in, you won't fully feel the pain if it disappears. But here's the cost. You rob yourself of the very experiences your heart longs for. You grieve blessings before they can be enjoyed. You live in a shadow of what-ifs, never fully allowing yourself to bask in the light of what is. Joy isn't dangerous, it's healing. And while vulnerability always carries risk, choosing to embrace happiness, even briefly, is a declaration that you're worthy of more than waiting for the other shoe to drop. You're worthy of the moment, the feeling, the celebration, without apology. Identifying only through your achievements. Identifying only through your achievements isn't drive, it's survival. It's the compulsion to prove your worth through gold stars, titles, productivity, and praise. It's the voice that says you only matter when you're doing, creating, succeeding, and if you slow down, fail, or rest, you disappear. This psychological pattern often begins in homes where affection was earned, not given freely. Where praise was tied to performance and love came through achievements. Maybe you were celebrated for being smart, responsible, or talented, but rarely, if ever, for simply being you. You learned early on that mistakes weren't safe, that being ordinary wasn't enough. So now you chase excellence not out of passion but out of fear. You measure your value in milestones. You can't rest without guilt. And even when you achieve something big, the high fades quickly, leaving you grasping for the next thing. Because underneath all that success, there's a question you're too afraid to answer. If I stop achieving, will anyone still love me? Will I still be enough? The tragedy is the very thing you use to earn love, your accomplishments, becomes the mask that hides your true self. People admire you, but they don't truly see you, because you don't let them. But your worth doesn't live in your resume. It lives in your breath, your being, your presence, even when you're not producing anything. And when you finally allow yourself to be seen beyond what you do, you'll discover a kind of love that achievement can never earn, but your heart has always deserved. Persistent self-monitoring in social settings. Persistent self-monitoring in social settings isn't about being courteous or socially refined. It's about survival masquerading as etiquette. It's not just noticing how you're behaving. It's obsessively analyzing every gesture, every sentence, every micro-expression. Your brain becomes a surveillance system aimed at yourself. Are you speaking too fast? Too slow? Too loud? Did they smile because they meant it, or because they're being polite? You're not just present in the room, you're constantly watching yourself from the outside, judging, adjusting, performing. And when the interaction ends, you're not relieved. You're haunted by replays. Did I come off wrong? Did I overshare? Should I have laughed more or less? This hypervigilance usually has roots in early experiences where being accepted wasn't a given, it was earned. Maybe your emotional safety depended on how agreeable or invisible you could be. Perhaps you were raised in an unpredictable household where small missteps led to anger, shame, or withdrawal. So, your nervous system learned a painful truth. Being perceived the wrong way is dangerous. Now every social setting feels like a performance review. You anticipate judgment before it happens. You mirror others to stay likable. You become so externally focused that you forget how you feel inside. It's not social confidence you're after. It's the relief of surviving another interaction without being seen as too much. But the cost of this constant self-monitoring is disconnection from others and from your true self. You're not living. You're scanning for threats with a smile stitched across your face, over-explaining simple things. Over-explaining isn't about clarity. It's a defense mechanism wrapped in nervous urgency. It's the way your tone shifts, the way your sentences grow longer than they need to be. It's the internal panic whispering, "Say more," just in case they misunderstood. You might think you're being thorough or thoughtful, but what you're really doing is pleading to be seen accurately, to not be misjudged, to not lose safety, because someone didn't understand your intention. You keep talking not because others need the detail, but because you need to feel protected. This pattern is often born in environments where you were constantly misread, mistrusted, or made to feel like your truth wasn't enough. Maybe your honesty was questioned. Maybe small misunderstandings led to outsized consequences. Or maybe your voice was constantly silenced. So now when you have the chance to speak, you try to cover every angle. Your nervous system races to fill in every gap. Don't leave room for confusion. Don't leave room for blame. Even when the topic is harmless, your body acts like the stakes are life or death. And in that panic, you forget that you don't need to earn your right to be heard. You forget that clarity doesn't always require excess. Over-explaining becomes a habit of self-erasure, where instead of trusting your words, you drown them in anxiety. And ironically, the more you explain, the less understood you feel. Because what you really want isn't just to be clear, it's to be safe, accepted, and believed without a courtroom's worth of justification. Panic or anxiety. When plans change suddenly. When plans change suddenly and panic rushes in, it's not about inflexibility, It's about survival instincts rooted in past chaos. To others, it might look like overreacting. But inside, your mind is unraveling. A rescheduled meeting, a cancelled dinner, a delayed ride, all of it sends your nervous system into crisis mode. The world feels like it just shifted beneath your feet, and you have nothing solid to hold on to. Your chest tightens, your thoughts race, and the worst part is, you often don't even understand why it hit you so hard. This isn't just discomfort, it's trauma resurfacing. Maybe you grew up in an unpredictable home where plans were often broken without notice, and with them your sense of trust, safety, or stability. You might have experienced emotional whiplash, promises made and shattered, caretakers who changed moods without warning, and so your brain developed an association: change equals danger. Now, any disruption, no matter how small, feels like the return of that instability. It's not about the event. It's about what the event symbolizes: abandonment, loss of control, emotional risk. You start thinking, what does this mean about me? Am I being left out? Is this a rejection? The fear isn't logical. It's biological. Your body braces for harm even when none is present. And though you might appear dramatic or over-attached to plans, the truth is you're just trying to find something consistent in a world that once taught you nothing ever was. This isn't rigidity, it's a heart still trying to protect itself from the tremors of unpredictability that once felt like earthquakes. Holding on to toxic people to avoid loneliness. Clinging to toxic people isn't a failure of strength, it's a scar from abandonment. It's a deeply rooted belief that hurtful connection is still better than no connection at all. You feel their toxicity, the anxiety when they text, the emotional exhaustion after every interaction, the way your confidence fades every time they criticize, manipulate, or ignore your needs. And yet you stay, not because you don't see it, but because you're terrified of the loneliness that might come if you let go. This red flag often traces back to a childhood where love was inconsistent or came at a cost. Maybe love meant pleasing others at your own expense. Maybe you were abandoned, emotionally or physically. Maybe silence and isolation were more painful than cruelty. So now, when someone mistreats you, your heart rationalizes it. You tell yourself it's better than being alone. You cling to breadcrumbs, hoping they'll turn into something real. You convince yourself that if you're patient, if you change, if you love hard enough, they'll transform. But deep down, the fear isn't just about losing them. It's about the aching void they leave behind. The terrifying idea that maybe you're not worthy of better, that maybe this is as good as it gets. But that's the wound talking, not the truth. Because staying in pain doesn't prevent loneliness. It just prolongs the heartbreak. Holding on to toxic people doesn't make you loyal. It makes you desperate to avoid the silence that once broke you. And the truth is, that silence, painful as it is, isn't your enemy. It's the space where your healing begins. Having intrusive thoughts, you're too ashamed to admit. Intrusive thoughts you're ashamed to admit aren't proof that something's wrong with you. They're proof that your brain is trying too hard to protect you. These thoughts arrive uninvited, jarring and disturbing. Images that don't reflect who you are, ideas that scare you. They may be violent, taboo, or sexually inappropriate, and they don't just startle you, they devastate you. You wonder what kind of person even thinks this way. The guilt spirals. You feel contaminated, dangerous, broken. But here's the truth. Intrusive thoughts are common, especially in people with high sensitivity, anxiety, OCD, or trauma histories. They're not a reflection of your morality or intentions, they're reflections of fear. Your mind under stress misfires warnings. It shows you what you don't want, what terrifies you in vivid detail. The problem isn't the thought itself, it's your reaction to it. You judge it, you resist it, you try to push it away, and in doing so, you give it power. The silence you keep around these thoughts breeds shame. And shame convinces you that you're alone in this, that no one else could possibly understand. But you're not alone. And you're not broken. You're just human, and your brain is responding to fear with overcorrection. These thoughts aren't confessions. They're signals that something in you feels unsafe. And healing begins not with denial, but with compassion. You are not defined by your thoughts. You are defined by how gently and bravely you meet them. Intrusive thoughts lose their grip the moment you stop fearing them and start recognizing them for what they are: noise, not truth. Sudden mood crashes, without clear triggers. Sudden mood crashes that arrive without warning aren't accidents. They're echoes, fragments of the past crashing into the present without permission. One moment you're laughing, grounded, maybe even hopeful, and the next, it's as if the emotional ground beneath you splits open. A flood of heaviness, restlessness, anxiety, or sheer numbness overtakes you, and you're left scanning your environment like a detective, desperately trying to locate the trigger. But there's nothing, no obvious threat, no recent memory that could explain the storm. And that silence, that emptiness of reason, is what makes it feel so terrifying. Because how do you fight something you can't name? These emotional drops aren't just chemical, they're deeply embodied. They're messages left behind by trauma that was never spoken aloud. They are your nervous system flinching in the absence of a blow. Your body keeps a language your conscious mind has long forgotten. A voice tone, a smell, a facial expression, or even a long pause in conversation can yank you back into a place you thought you had escaped. It's not just a mood swing. It's a physiological flashback. Your body mourning something it can't put into words. And when it happens, the people around you might roll their eyes or dismiss it, thinking you're overreacting, dramatic, or just too sensitive. But what they don't understand is that you're not reacting to now, you're reacting to a then that never got resolved. And every time this happens, you question your sanity. You begin to wonder if you're broken. But you're not. You're carrying emotional debris that was never cleared. And every crash is your body saying, there is still something here, and it wants to be felt. These moments are not weakness. They are the return of a voice long silenced, asking, finally, to be heard. Feeling like you're faking it all the time. Impostor Syndrome. There's a specific kind of torment in feeling like a fraud while living in a body others admire. Impostor Syndrome isn't just insecurity, it's chronic self-erasure. It's the persistent, quiet belief that somehow you've slipped through the cracks and fooled everyone around you, that your achievements were lucky flukes, that the praise is misplaced, that one day someone will finally say out loud what you've whispered to yourself for years: you don't belong here. But this isn't rooted in incompetence, it's rooted in misattuned environments, places where being perfect was the price of acceptance, where you had to perform to be loved, where mistakes were punished and success was met with silence or jealousy. Maybe your talents were noticed, but your efforts never honored. Maybe love was conditional, and so you internalized the message, nothing I do is ever enough. And now, no matter how much you accomplish, the feeling persists, not as a thought, but as a truth carved deep into your identity. You downplay every success. You attribute it to timing, to someone else's mistake, to the idea that you just got lucky. You overwork, overprepare, and overthink, not to get ahead, but to outrun the voice that tells you you're seconds away from being exposed. You may be celebrated by others, but inside you feel like a scared child in an adult costume, hoping no one sees how ill-fitting it is. The pain of imposter syndrome is the disconnection from your own brilliance. You don't reject success, you survive it. Because when you believe your worth is a borrowed costume, nothing ever truly feels like it's yours. And behind every achievement is a fear, not of failure, but of finally being seen and found unworthy. Seeing compromise as weakness. When you see compromise as weakness, life becomes a constant standoff. Every request feels like a demand. Every differing opinion feels like an attack. You dig your heels in not because you're confident, but because yielding feels like erasure. Somewhere deep down there's a belief that giving up even a fraction of your stance means losing all of yourself, that bending means breaking, that listening means surrendering your safety. This defense mechanism is often born from betrayal, emotional, relational, or even existential. Maybe you grew up in a space where your boundaries were violated, where no one respected your voice, or where giving in meant being taken advantage of. You learn to equate vulnerability with danger and openness with powerlessness. So now when conflict arises, you become a fortress. You hold your ground, not because you believe you're always right, but because the alternative feels too risky. You may call it strength, but it's fear dressed in armor. You protect yourself by resisting softness, collaboration, and the messiness of mutual understanding. People around you may stop trying to get close, not because they don't care, but because your refusal to yield becomes exhausting. And you can feel it. Relationships thinning, opportunities slipping through the cracks. Love kept at arm's length. But the truth is, compromise isn't defeat. It's the courage to remain flexible without losing yourself. It's the willingness to believe that collaboration can be safe, that connection doesn't require control, and that your strength isn't proven by how rigid you can remain, but by how open you're willing to be, without betraying who you are. Fear of being found out as a fraud. The fear of being exposed as a fraud is different from ordinary insecurity. It's not just about doubting your abilities, it's about fearing annihilation. It's the psychological weight of carrying a mask for so long that you forget what your own face looks like. Every time someone praises you, it feels like a trap. Every success is a countdown. You wait for the day when someone peels back the surface and sees the unworthy core you've always believed was hiding underneath. This fear often forms in childhood, where you had to become who others needed instead of who you truly were. Maybe you were the golden child, the overachiever, the caretaker, or maybe you were invisible trying to earn affection through excellence. In either case, you learned to perform your worth, not to feel it. And now, even in adulthood, you carry that performance like a survival mechanism, because deep down you don't trust that being yourself is enough. You overfunction in relationships. You say yes when you want to scream no. You edit your personality to avoid disapproval. And still you feel like a fraud. Not because you're dishonest, but because you've had to hide your authentic self for so long, you're not sure it's allowed to exist. This fear doesn't go away by achieving more. In fact, the more you accomplish, the more unbearable it becomes, because every success is another piece of evidence against your inner belief, and you don't know which one to believe anymore. You wear the crown, but feel like an imposter in the throne room, and until you learn to connect with your worth beyond performance, every win will feel hollow. Because when you're afraid of being found out, you can never truly be seen. Deep resentment masked by politeness. Politeness can be poison when it's used as camouflage. When resentment simmers beneath your soft tone and agreeable smile, you're not being kind. You're being self-abandoning. Every no worries when you're furious. Every it's fine when it clearly isn't. Every time you say yes to avoid conflict, you are trading authenticity for approval. And each of those trades costs a piece of your peace. This red flag often grows in households or environments where expressing displeasure was dangerous or dismissed. Maybe you were punished for anger. Maybe your emotions were mocked, ignored, or met with silence. So you adapted. You learned that it was safer to be easygoing, to smile through discomfort, to anticipate everyone else's needs while silencing your own. Now your relationships praise you for being so chill and so helpful and were so nice, but inside you're simmering. Every suppressed truth adds pressure. Every swallowed boundary builds weight. Eventually, that pressure leaks out in sarcasm, passive aggression, stonewalling, or sudden withdrawal that others don't understand. To them, it's out of nowhere. To you, it's years in the making. And the worst part? You start to feel like a fraud. Not because you're faking kindness, but because your kindness is drenched in fatigue. You crave being known, but fear being rejected. So you wear the mask, you maintain the image, you carry the weight. But at what cost? The tragedy of this pattern is that it disconnects you from real intimacy. Because as long as you hide your true feelings, no one can truly love the real you. And somewhere in the quiet you wonder, what would it be like if I didn't have to smile through the pain? Only feeling okay when in control. There's a storm that brews inside those who only feel safe when they're in control. It doesn't look like chaos from the outside. It looks like discipline, perfectionism, leadership, even strength. But what it really is survival. When your entire nervous system has been wired to expect betrayal, unpredictability, or abandonment, control becomes your only anchor in a world that once felt like quicksand. You micromanage outcomes not because you want power, but because you fear collapse. Every plan you make, every decision you overanalyze, every backup plan you obsess over, it's all rooted in the silent panic that if you let go, even for a moment everything will fall apart. The truth is, it's not control you crave, it's safety. But the two have become so tangled in your mind that you no longer know how to separate peace from planning. So you grip tighter, think harder, push further. Not because you're okay, but because you never learned how to feel safe when things are out of your hands. Avoiding compliments by redirecting the focus. When someone says something kind to you, a genuine compliment, your body freezes. It should be simple, right? A smile, a thank you. But instead, your instinct is to shift the spotlight, to deflect it away from yourself as fast as possible. It wasn't just me. You too! I got lucky. These aren't just humble replies. They're shields, because somewhere along the line, being seen became unsafe. Recognition felt like pressure. Praise felt like bait. Compliments were once given right before something was taken away. Love, safety, peace. So now, when someone admires you, it doesn't feel like appreciation. It feels like exposure. And exposure feels dangerous. You were never taught to believe you were enough. Only that your worth depended on what you could do for others, how well you could disappear, how little you needed. So when someone sees your light, you hide it. Because deep down, you're still afraid that if you're truly seen, you'll be misunderstood. Or worse, hurt. Being overly agreeable to avoid conflict. You nod along, you say it's fine. You laugh at things that bother you. You go with the flow even when the current is dragging you under. Why? Because conflict doesn't feel like disagreement. It feels like danger. Your nervous system doesn't differentiate between a conversation and a war zone when your earliest memories of standing up for yourself ended in silence, punishment, or emotional withdrawal. So now your peace comes at the cost of your authenticity. You say yes when you want to say no. You agree when your whole chest says, please speak up. But your body doesn't let you. It freezes, fawns, submits. You've trained yourself to become what others need just to avoid the tremor of disapproval. And over time you forget what you even want, because your identity has been shaped around keeping things calm, quiet, manageable. Not because you're weak, but because being too much once made people leave. So now, you make yourself small to make sure they stay. Believing suffering is noble or necessary. There's a haunting lie that suffering is somehow holy, that the more you endure, the more worthy you become. You carry emotional wounds like medals, exhausted but proud. You tell yourself that hardship builds character, that struggle is a sign of strength, that you must earn love through pain. This belief didn't come from nowhere. It was taught, passed down like an heirloom from generations who had no choice but to survive. But now it's become a cage. You reject ease because it feels lazy. You fear healing because you think it'll make you soft. You downplay rest, pleasure, joy, as if they're sins instead of your birthright. The truth is, suffering doesn't make you more lovable. It doesn't make your life more meaningful. You don't have to bleed to be seen. You've just been conditioned to believe that peace is selfish and struggle is sacred. But it's not. You are allowed to live without constantly proving your worth through pain. Trouble identifying your own needs. When someone asks what you want, you freeze, not because you're indecisive, but because you genuinely don't know. For so long, your needs have been buried beneath everyone else's. You've become so used to reading the room, adjusting yourself and anticipating others' emotions, that you've forgotten how to listen to your own. You check in with their moods before checking in with yours. You say, I'm okay, out of habit, not truth. But deep inside, there's a quiet ache, a longing to be seen without having to perform, to be cared for without guilt, to want something just for you. It's not that your needs disappeared. They were ignored, silenced, overwritten. And now, even when you feel discomfort, you struggle to name it. You were taught that needing too much was dangerous, so now you numb it, dismiss it, or convince yourself you're fine. But the truth is, your needs matter, they always did. You're just now beginning to hear them again. Thinking your pain isn't bad enough to seek help. Thinking your pain isn't bad enough to seek help is one of the most damaging lies we quietly tell ourselves. It's the voice that says, you're fine, even as you're breaking. It's the silent comparison to people who've suffered worse, as if suffering must be ranked before it can be acknowledged. This mindset is dangerous because it convinces you that silence is strength, that endurance is noble, and that seeking support is selfish. You dismiss your pain not because it doesn't hurt, but because you've been conditioned to believe it doesn't count. That unless you're on the brink of collapse, your pain is an inconvenience. This belief often stems from environments where vulnerability was a weakness to be scolded, mocked, or ignored. Maybe when you cried, someone told you to toughen up. Maybe when you reached out, you were met with guilt. At least you're not homeless, or others would kill to have your problems. And so, you internalized a rule: only visible, dramatic suffering is worthy of attention. Everything else? Suppress it, endure it, get over it. But that suppression creates a slow, corrosive decay. You start showing up like nothing's wrong while silently unraveling inside. You learn how to smile while numb, and how to carry burdens that quietly shatter your inner world. You tell yourself to push through it, and you do, but it comes at a cost. The cost is emotional isolation. The cost is not knowing what it feels like to be comforted without qualification. And worst of all, you start to believe that needing help makes you weak, or worse, ungrateful. So you wait. You wait until you're drowning before asking for a life vest. Because anything less than disaster doesn't feel like it deserves rescue. But pain doesn't need to scream to be valid. Hurt doesn't have to be catastrophic to be real. And if you continue to disqualify your pain, you'll continue to disqualify yourself from the healing you deserve. Because silence is not strength. Denial is not resilience. And refusing to ask for help doesn't make you noble. It just keeps you further from the relief you so deeply need. Hypercriticism of yourself over minor mistakes. Hypercriticism of yourself over minor mistakes is not ambition, and it's not high standards. It's a psychological war zone where you're both the prisoner and the executioner. It looks like obsessing over a typo for hours. It feels like beating yourself up over being 5 minutes late or forgetting to reply to a message. It's not a slip. It's a catastrophe. You don't just feel bad about the mistake. You feel like you are the mistake. And that is the root of this hidden red flag, the belief that your worth is measured by your perfection. That one wrong move erases everything good you've ever done, and so you spiral, not just from the error itself, but from the deep shame it triggers within you. This kind of brutal self-monitoring often originates in conditional environments, places where praise was performance-based and love came with fine print. Maybe you were only noticed when you excelled. Maybe mistakes were punished or ridiculed, not seen as human but as failures of character. Over time, your brain learned, to be safe, I must be flawless. Now, that belief rules your nervous system. You rehearse every social interaction. You overanalyze every task. You apologize excessively, even when you didn't do anything wrong. And when the inevitable mistake happens, however small, your inner voice doesn't correct, it condemns. You idiot. You always mess up. You're such a disappointment. That voice isn't yours. It's an echo of all the times you were made to feel like you weren't enough. And so, perfection becomes your armor, not because you want to impress others, but because you're terrified of what failure says about you. But the truth is, this kind of internal punishment doesn't make you better. It makes you afraid. It kills creativity. It limits joy. It robs you of trying new things because the cost of error feels like emotional death. And unless you rewrite that internal script, unless you learn to respond to mistakes with compassion, not cruelty, you will keep holding yourself hostage to an impossible standard, forever chasing a version of yourself that doesn't make mistakes, and therefore doesn't exist. Dismissing joy or good news too quickly. Dismissing joy or good news too quickly isn't modesty. It's emotional self-sabotage wrapped in the language of humility. It's the instinct to say, don't jinx it, before the moment even arrives. It's the awkward smile when someone compliments you, the quick pivot away from celebration, the deeply conditioned fear that good things can't last, or worse, that you don't deserve them. This behavior isn't born from negativity. It's born from grief, from too many experiences where joy was a prelude to loss, where getting your hopes up meant setting yourself up for devastation. And so now, hope feels like a liability. This emotional reflex often comes from childhoods or relationships where joy was unpredictable, rare, or weaponized. Maybe the moment you relaxed, something painful happened. Maybe good news was always followed by disappointment. Maybe you were taught directly or indirectly that being too happy makes you vulnerable, that when you're smiling, life strikes. So now, every time joy knocks on the door, you flinch. You emotionally back away. You laugh it off, you downplay it before it has the chance to disappear, as if your detachment can somehow protect you from the heartbreak of impermanence. But this defense mechanism has a cruel side effect. It stops you from ever fully feeling the beauty of your life as it happens. You rob yourself of presence. You dismiss wins before they land. You prepare for endings while you're still mid-beginning. And over time, this becomes your normal, a life lived in emotional exile, even during the good parts. But joy isn't dangerous. It's sacred. It's not something to brace against, but something to lean into, even if it's fleeting. Because rejecting happiness doesn't prevent pain. It only guarantees that you won't get to feel the healing moments when they do come. And the truth is, joy doesn't need to be earned. It needs to be welcomed. Always expecting the worst, catastrophizing. Always expecting the worst or catastrophizing isn't just anxiety. It's a survival strategy shaped by pain. It's the relentless scanning of every situation for danger. It's assuming that silence means abandonment, that a small headache means something terminal, that good moments are traps waiting to collapse. You don't call it fear, you call it being prepared. But what you're really doing is trying to soften the impact of imagined disasters by living through them in advance. You prepare for pain that hasn't even arrived, because the idea of being caught off guard feels more terrifying than the pain itself. This pattern is almost always born in unpredictability. Maybe you grew up in chaos, where love was inconsistent, finances were unstable, or the emotional climate could change without warning. Your brain learned that security was a lie, and calm was just the pause before another storm. So now, even in peace, your body remains braced for impact. You tell yourself you're just being realistic, but deep down, you're stuck in a loop of hypervigilance. Joy feels unsafe, rest feels irresponsible, hope feels foolish. So you rehearse grief, you visualize failure, and you call it caution. But the truth is, you're exhausted. You end up living inside imagined tragedies. You mourn losses that haven't happened. You brace for betrayals that never come. And while you think you're protecting yourself, you're actually harming yourself twice. Once in your imagination, and maybe, someday, in reality. But what if safety wasn't about controlling the future? What if it was about learning to stay with the present, even when it's uncertain? What if peace could be trusted, not just tolerated? Because unless you unlearn this reflex, you'll keep missing the very moments that could have healed you, moments you were too busy preparing for the worst to notice. Making jokes to hide genuine hurt. Making jokes to hide genuine hurt is one of the most convincing emotional disguises. You become the life of the party, the one with the quick wit, the sharp comebacks, the perfectly timed punchlines. People laugh with you, sometimes at you, and no one suspects that behind every joke is a wound trying to breathe. You've made humor your armor, sarcasm your shield, self-deprecation your camouflage, and in doing so, you've mastered the art of being seen while staying emotionally invisible. The pain is there, raw, buried, pulsing, but you only let it out dressed in comedy, because that way it doesn't scare people. That way you don't have to be vulnerable, just funny. This coping mechanism often begins in places where honesty was dangerous, where pain was met with indifference, invalidation, or cruelty. Maybe you were told to lighten up or stop being so sensitive. Maybe you learned early that crying invited mockery, or that speaking your truth got you hurt. So you adapted. You learned to make others laugh before they could make you cry. You turned your suffering into stories, your heartbreak into entertainment. You got so good at it, even you started believing the illusion. But the tragedy is that humor becomes a wall, not a bridge. People connect to the surface, but they never see what's underneath. They think you're okay. How could you not be? You're always joking, always smiling. But beneath the charm is a deep loneliness, a quiet plea to be taken seriously, a fear that if you drop the act, no one will care. And so you keep deflecting, you keep laughing. But what you really want What you truly need is for someone to look past the punchline and say, "I see you, I hear you." You don't have to perform to be loved. Fantasizing about disappearing or starting over. Fantasizing about disappearing or starting over isn't a sign of immaturity, selfishness, or drama. It's a silent, aching signal from a part of you that's gasping for breath beneath the surface of your carefully constructed life. These aren't just random thoughts that drift in during hard days. They're emotional lifelines thrown by a self that feels lost, unseen, and suffocated by responsibilities, expectations, and emotional exhaustion. You imagine vanishing without warning. Maybe it's a late-night thought of packing a small bag, driving until the cities fade, changing your name, and beginning again where no one recognizes your face or your past. This isn't about hating your life. It's about feeling invisible inside it. You've been moving through roles, routines, and relationships that may look fine on the surface, but somewhere along the way, you stopped feeling like you, in any of it. The fantasy of disappearing stems from years of emotional survival, performing, people-pleasing, checking boxes that were handed to you by others, all while never once asking yourself, what do I truly need? It's a craving for absence, not of life, but of noise. A deep yearning to be somewhere without pressure, without history, without having to explain your tiredness. These thoughts don't arise when things are falling apart. They strike in the stillness, at red lights, in work meetings, in moments of quiet, where you suddenly realize how far you've drifted from yourself. But here's what's vital to understand. These fantasies aren't about escape. They're about rescue. They're your soul's quiet cry to be found again, to be reclaimed, to be rewritten without apology. You're not broken for wanting out. You're buried. And those daydreams are proof that the real you is still in there, trying to breathe. Avoiding emotional intimacy, even in close relationships. Avoiding emotional intimacy, even with people who care deeply for you, doesn't mean you're cold or incapable of love. It often means you've been hurt in ways that made openness feel like danger. You can be the most loving, supportive person in the room and still keep your heart locked behind iron doors. You may show up for others, laugh, tell stories, and even be vulnerable, but only to a point. There's always a carefully drawn line that no one's allowed to cross, and the tragedy is, the people around you rarely know it exists. This red flag often grows from betrayal, the kind that teaches you that being known leads to being hurt. Maybe in the past, your honesty was used against you. Maybe your feelings were met with ridicule, manipulation, or cold indifference. So now, instead of inviting people in, you become a fortress of smiles and surface-level warmth. You've mastered deflection, shifting conversations away from your pain, filling silence with humor or logic, offering support but never asking for it. You become a phantom in your own relationships, there but not truly seen. And while you may long for someone to know you deeply, you pull back the moment they get too close, not out of cruelty, but out of a deep fear that once they do see you fully, they'll walk away. This is the paradox, craving connection while fearing exposure. It's not about not caring, it's about not feeling safe. And until those emotional walls are gently dismantled, intimacy remains a double-edged sword, something you yearn for and avoid all at once. Believing others are better off without you. Believing others are better off without you is one of the cruelest lies your wounded mind can tell. It wraps itself in the language of logic, whispering that you're too much, too broken, too complicated, a weight instead of a gift. This belief doesn't arise in loud moments of rejection. It grows in silence, in the quiet absence of affirmation, in the moments when your presence is met with indifference or worse, when you were punished for simply needing love. Maybe your childhood taught you that being wanted was conditional. Maybe you learned early that your feelings were a nuisance, your presence a burden. So you began to shrink, to apologize for existing, to pull back even when people wanted you close. And now, no matter how much affection or love is offered, it doesn't sink in. You believe it's obligation. You question their sincerity. You tell yourself they're being polite, not honest, because in your core you've been programmed to feel disposable. So you withdraw not because people hurt you, but because you assume you're hurting them just by being around. This red flag turns love into a source of guilt, where even the act of being comforted feels like you're taking too much. You become emotionally self-sufficient to the point of starvation. You push people away to protect them from you, not realizing you're depriving them of the person they love. The tragedy is, you are wanted, deeply. But your mind built a wall so high that even love can't scale it. The path forward isn't in proving your worth to others, it's in learning to believe it yourself. Sudden withdrawal from hobbies or passions. Suddenly withdrawing from your hobbies or passions is often misunderstood as laziness or distraction, but it's so much more than that. It's a red flag waving from the depths of your inner world, trying to tell you that something inside has fractured. These passions once lit you up. Painting, writing, building, exploring. They weren't just pastimes, they were lifelines, expressions of who you are. And then one day they fade. You stop picking up the guitar, the notebook stays blank, the brush doesn't touch the canvas. You tell yourself you're just tired, busy, or uninspired, but the truth is you're emotionally depleted. Your mind is overwhelmed, your heart is heavy. Passion requires presence, and when you're emotionally drowning, presence is a luxury you can't afford. This isn't about boredom, it's about survival. When your nervous system is in crisis, creativity feels frivolous, even painful. The very things that once brought joy now highlight your distance from it. And the guilt only deepens the cycle. You beat yourself up for not caring, not creating, not trying. But deep down your soul is grieving. Grieving the version of you that had the energy to dream, the safety to play, the permission to feel. This isn't a phase, it's a form of loss. A quiet mourning for the self you once were, buried under burnout, trauma, or emotional chaos. Reigniting those passions isn't about forcing yourself to try again. It's about healing enough to feel safe inside your own body, enough for joy to return and stay. Emotionally overreacting to minor inconveniences. Emotionally overreacting to small inconveniences isn't about being overly sensitive or dramatic. It's about carrying so much emotional weight that even the tiniest drop causes an overflow. A flat tire, a lost email, a broken glass. These become the final crack in a dam that's been holding back an ocean of unspoken stress and suppressed emotion. From the outside, it looks irrational, but no one sees the years behind it. The countless times you bit your tongue, the silent battles, the sleepless nights spent holding everything and everyone together. This red flag is a delayed explosion of everything you didn't have time or permission to feel. Maybe you were raised to be strong, to not complain, to push through. So you did, until your nervous system stopped being able to tell the difference between a mild stressor and a genuine threat. When your body is in constant survival mode, even a minor disruption feels like collapse. The tears over the misplaced keys aren't about the keys. They're about the months of emotional neglect, often self-imposed, that made you believe you didn't have time to feel. And afterward, the shame creeps in. You call yourself dramatic, unstable, or weak. But you're not weak. You're saturated. Your outburst wasn't senseless. It was a release your body could no longer postpone. Healing begins when you stop shaming the explosion and start asking what caused the pressure in the first place. Because the meltdown isn't the failure, it's the message, a cry for space, rest, and emotional acknowledgement that's long overdue. Preferring chaos over calm, because calm feels unfamiliar. Choosing chaos over calm isn't about being reckless, it's a silent adaptation to an unsafe past. It's the reflexive discomfort that stirs when everything around you is finally quiet. For most, peace is something to embrace, but for some it feels like a trap. The stillness rings too loud. It feels deceptive, like the moment before the earthquake. And that's because your nervous system has been taught that calm is the calm before the storm. This red flag often grows in childhood environments that were emotionally unpredictable. Homes filled with explosive arguments, silent treatments, sudden outbursts, or a general sense of instability. Calm never lasted, and when it did arrive, it was only a prelude to chaos. Over time, your mind and body adapted to that rhythm. You became someone who could read tension in a room without a word being spoken. You learned to anticipate danger, not because you were paranoid, but because you had to be. Chaos wasn't just common, it was normal. And so in adulthood, When things finally begin to feel normal or peaceful, your body doesn't relax, it braces. You scan for problems, create distractions, or even self-sabotage, not out of malice but out of survival. You might fill your calendar to avoid the quiet. You might pick fights or overthink every little thing. You might feel inexplicably nervous when everything is going well. Because calm feels like you're letting your guard down. It feels like weakness. But it's not your fault. Your brain equated chaos with safety, and now that safety feels dangerous. The peace you long for, the peace you deserve, feels like foreign territory. But the more you expose yourself to gentleness without catastrophe, the more you allow your body to rewire. You were never meant to live in a state of constant alertness. Your nervous system deserves to rest, and you deserve a life where calm doesn't feel like a lie, fearing people will abandon you if you disagree. The fear of being left behind for speaking your truth isn't about a dislike of conflict. It's about the deep, lingering terror that love is conditional. It's not that you don't have opinions or a strong sense of self. It's that sharing them feels like gambling with your relationships. Every time disagreement arises, you freeze. You second-guess yourself. You change your tone, soften your edges, and often abandon your stance. Not because you've changed your mind, but because you're trying not to be left. This fear is deeply rooted in early experiences where approval had to be earned, and love came with strings. Maybe you were punished for speaking out. Maybe silence was a weapon used against you. Maybe your caregivers only showed affection when you complied. As a result, your nervous system learned to associate disagreement with danger, with loss, with rejection. And so now, even as an adult, you say yes when you mean no. You agree to things that drain you. You nod along just to keep the peace. Not because you're weak, but because you learned that safety is tied to obedience. The problem is, each time you silence yourself, you lose a piece of who you are. You make yourself smaller so others will stay, but their presence begins to feel hollow because they're staying for a version of you that doesn't fully exist. You become resentful, disconnected, and uncertain of where your identity ends and performance begins. The truth is, real love can hold disagreement. Real connection doesn't require conformity. And the fear that you'll be unloved if you ever assert yourself is not a reflection of your worth. It's a shadow cast by relationships that taught you love had to be earned. You are not unlovable for having boundaries, beliefs, or needs. You don't have to shrink to be safe, being unnerved by kindness or generosity. When kindness unsettles you, it's not because you're ungrateful, it's because your body doesn't know what to do with softness that doesn't come with a price. You flinch, emotionally or physically, when someone offers help. You immediately try to reciprocate, downplay your needs, or dismiss compliments, not out of rudeness, but because somewhere in your history, kindness became a warning sign. It wasn't offered freely. It came with expectations, manipulation, or strings attached. You were taught directly or indirectly that affection was transactional, that love had fine print, that giving meant control. So when someone shows up for you without needing anything back, it doesn't feel soothing, it feels suspicious. Your mind races. What do they want? When will this turn? What am I missing? You don't trust kindness because you've been burned by it before. This often comes from childhood environments where affection was a performance-based currency, where vulnerability was dangerous, where the people who were supposed to care for you used love as leverage. Now, as an adult, you might keep people at a distance. You might pride yourself on being independent, on never needing anyone. But beneath that armor is a heart that aches for connection, for softness, for safety. And yet when it finally arrives, you can't receive it, because your body tenses, your mind resists, your trauma tries to protect you. But protection isn't always the same as healing. The truth is, not everyone wants something from you. Not every kind word is manipulation. And not every act of generosity is a setup. Learning to trust kindness is hard, but it's the path back to intimacy, to openness, to peace. You are allowed to receive without guilt. You are worthy of love that doesn't hurt. Intense guilt after setting boundaries. Feeling deep guilt after setting a boundary isn't proof you were cruel. It's evidence that you were never taught it was safe to protect yourself. Saying no feels like betrayal. Expressing a need feels like selfishness. You replay the interaction over and over, wondering if you were too harsh, too rigid, too cold. Even when you know the boundary was necessary, the shame floods in. And it's not just guilt, it's panic. The kind that whispers, "They'll leave, they'll hate you, you've ruined everything." This emotional response is often born in families or relationships where your value was tied to compliance. Maybe you were praised only when you sacrificed your needs. Maybe standing up for yourself was met with anger or withdrawal. Maybe love was earned through being agreeable, helpful, or invisible. In such environments, boundaries weren't healthy. They were seen as rejection. And so now the act of drawing a line feels like an act of harm. You over-explain. You apologize. You try to cushion the blow so much that the boundary loses its shape. And still, you feel bad. Not because you've done wrong, but because you've been conditioned to believe that others' comfort matters more than your own. But here's the truth. Boundaries are not walls. They're expressions of self-respect. They're the way you stay whole in relationships rather than disappearing into them. The guilt you feel isn't a sign that you've hurt someone. It's a signal that your nervous system is trying to protect you from past pain. It's echoing old patterns that no longer serve you. But you don't have to live inside those patterns forever. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to protect your peace. And you're allowed to choose yourself without apology. Craving drama to feel alive. Craving drama isn't about wanting chaos. It's about needing intensity because your emotional baseline has been shaped by turbulence. When stillness feels like emptiness and calm feels like being forgotten, you unconsciously seek out the only thing that gives you a pulse: conflict. Not because you love pain, but because it reminds you you're alive. The arguments, the emotional highs and lows, the push and pull, they light you up, even as they burn you down. This pattern often begins in childhoods, where emotional safety didn't exist, where love was loud, unpredictable, and inconsistent. Maybe the only time you felt seen was during conflict. Maybe chaos was the only constant. And so, without realizing it, you began to equate intensity with love. Drama became your love language. Stability, on the other hand, feels suffocating. It feels fake. It feels like a waiting room for the next explosion. So in relationships, you might provoke fights just to feel something real. You might chase emotionally unavailable people or get entangled in messy dynamics, not because you enjoy suffering, but because that emotional roller coaster feels like home. But what you're really chasing isn't drama. It's validation. It's confirmation that you matter, that you still exist, that someone still cares enough to fight. And the tragedy is, you end up exhausting yourself trying to feel alive. You mistake adrenaline for affection. You confuse panic for passion. But peace isn't absence. It's presence without pressure. It's love that doesn't hurt. And you deserve a life where aliveness doesn't come at the cost of your sanity, where connection doesn't require chaos, where you don't need to burn to feel seen. Persistent comparison to others. Persistent comparison to others is one of the most deceptive forms of self-harm, masquerading as ambition. It whispers that you're simply striving to improve, when in truth, you're slowly eroding your self-worth by using everyone else as your mirror. It begins quietly, a scroll through social media here, a casual conversation there, and suddenly, someone else's smile becomes the reason you frown. Their joy becomes the seed of your insecurity. Their success, your invisible failure. You begin to measure your progress not by your own growth, but by the gap between you and them, a gap that widens no matter how much you run. What fuels this red flag is often a background of conditional love, where praise, affection, or validation were only offered in competition. Maybe you were the child constantly compared to a more talented sibling, the student who could never quite impress enough, the friend always in someone else's shadow. So you learned early on that being good wasn't enough. You had to be better than someone else to be seen at all. And since then, you've been measuring your value with someone else's ruler, living a life that feels like one long race where the finish line never stops moving. Now, you don't just compare achievements. You compare peace, relationships, timing, even how others carry their pain. You see someone smiling through struggle, and you wonder why you can't do the same. And the more you compare, the smaller you feel. It's not inspiration. It's a slow disappearance of your own identity under the weight of others' lives. But the cruelest part? No one wins this race. It's built to make sure you never arrive because what you're chasing isn't growth. It's approval you were never given, and it will always feel just out of reach because your worth was never meant to be earned through comparison. It already existed. You just forgot to look inward to find it. Self-blame for others' bad behavior. Blaming yourself for someone else's bad behavior doesn't make you strong. It makes you quietly bleed while convincing yourself the wound is your fault. It's not accountability, it's survival. A twisted logic, born in chaos. You tell yourself, maybe I provoked them, maybe I wasn't clear enough, maybe I deserved it. Because believing it was your fault is somehow safer than accepting that you were helpless. At least if it was your fault, maybe you can fix it next time. This red flag often begins in households ruled by volatility, where a parent's rage felt like a storm you were responsible for calming. Maybe you were the peacekeeper, the good child, the fixer. You learned to analyze every reaction, every tone, every shift in energy, because your safety depended on it. Over time, you began internalizing every outburst as your own failure. Now, when someone crosses a line, you don't get angry. You get guilty. You don't ask, why did they do that? You ask, what did I do wrong? You over-explain, over-apologize, and shrink to make space for others' cruelty. You twist yourself into knots to prevent future explosions, confusing emotional abuse with natural consequence. And in doing so, you bury your voice. You protect their dysfunction by punishing yourself for it. The tragedy is that the more you take responsibility for others' harm, the more invisible you become. But you are not the cause of their behavior. You were simply the easiest one to hand the blame to. And every time you accept it, you abandon the parts of you that long to be defended. Their cruelty wasn't your fault. It was their choice. And healing begins when you stop mistaking survival for self-blame and start choosing truth over guilt. Dismissing your trauma because others had it. Worse, minimizing your trauma in the name of perspective isn't strength. It's emotional abandonment wearing the mask of humility. You tell yourself it wasn't that bad, that other people went through worse, that your pain doesn't count because it didn't break you in the most visible way. You silence your wounds, not because they don't hurt, but because you were taught they weren't important enough to name. This mindset is often rooted in environments where your emotions were too inconvenient to be taken seriously. Maybe your tears were met with other people have it worse. Maybe you were praised for being strong when what you needed was permission to fall apart. So you learned to compare scars, and when yours didn't look fatal, you decided they didn't matter. But pain doesn't need to reach catastrophe to deserve compassion. It doesn't need to win the suffering Olympics to be real. Your trauma may not be the loudest in the room, but it still echoes inside you. In anxiety, in shutdowns, in the way you flinch at kindness or withdraw when you're overwhelmed. You carry the symptoms but deny the source. You offer empathy to others and starve yourself of it. Every time you dismiss your pain, you deepen the wound. You teach your body that its cries will not be heard. But healing doesn't come from comparison. It comes from acknowledgement. And until you allow your truth to be valid, you'll keep living in silence. You were hurt. That is enough. You don't need permission to grieve what scarred you. You only need the courage to believe yourself. Believing you're unlovable, unless you're perfect. The belief that you must be perfect to be loved is a brutal, invisible cage. It convinces you that love is not a right, but a prize, earned only by flawless behavior, endless effort, and complete emotional control. Every mistake feels like proof that you are unworthy. Every moment of vulnerability becomes a liability, so you become obsessed with being enough, which really means being more polished, more agreeable, more impressive, and yet the more you give, the less you feel seen. This red flag often forms in childhood, where love was conditional, offered when you were useful, withdrawn when you were human. You may have been praised only for achievements, ignored when you cried, corrected when you needed comfort. So you learned to perform instead of exist. You became what others needed, and in the process, lost the parts of yourself that were desperate to just be. Now, as an adult, you fear rest. You second-guess every word you say. You mistrust love when it arrives because deep down, you believe no one could truly want you, not unless you're perfect. You measure your worth through productivity, your likability through compliance. And when someone offers genuine affection, you shrink. Because how could they love what you hide from? The real tragedy isn't just the exhaustion, it's the loneliness. Because when you believe you must be perfect to be loved, you never let anyone meet the real you. They fall for the mask, and you're left wondering if anyone could ever love the person beneath it. But perfection was never the price of love. It was the lie that kept you from receiving it. Avoiding mirrors due to body-related distress. Avoiding mirrors isn't vanity, it's grief wrapped in silence. It's the ache of 1,000 unspoken judgments echoing back at you. You avert your gaze, not because you don't care, but because it hurts too much to look. Every reflection becomes a confrontation, not with your body, but with the war waged against it. A war you never signed up for, but have fought every day of your life. This red flag is born from a world that has conditioned you to see your body as a problem. Maybe you were teased as a child. Maybe a trusted adult made a passing comment that etched itself into your bones. Maybe magazines, movies, and media trained your eyes to see yourself as an object, measurable, marketable, fixable. So now the mirror doesn't show you a person, it shows you a list of flaws. You dress in dim lighting. You hide in photos. Compliments make you uncomfortable, not because you're modest, but because you don't believe them. You carry shame like skin, and every glance in the mirror feels like a betrayal. But what you're avoiding isn't just your reflection. It's the lifelong pain of being told you were wrong for existing as you are. The truth is, your body has never been the enemy. The shame was never yours to carry. And every time you turn away from the mirror, you miss the chance to see yourself with compassion. Healing doesn't mean loving every part immediately. It means choosing to stop punishing yourself for not being someone else. It means recognizing that your reflection doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to be freed. Compulsive need to prove yourself, constantly. A compulsive need to prove yourself isn't just about wanting more. It's about fearing you're not enough. It's not drive. It's not motivation. It's desperation wearing a mask of ambition. There's an inner voice that whispers, if you stop, you'll vanish. If you pause, you'll fall behind. If you rest, you'll lose worth. And so you chase not with joy, but with terror. The world sees you as a high achiever, but deep inside you're sprinting from the shame that once told you your value only lives in your success. This red flag often blooms in childhood environments where love came with strings attached. Maybe affection was given only when you were impressive. Maybe attention arrived only when you performed well. So you internalized the belief that being was not enough. You had to be exceptional, helpful, pleasing. Over time, your identity fused with doing. Accomplishment became your oxygen. But when success becomes a shield for self-worth, it never satisfies. Each win is fleeting. The applause fades. And before you've even celebrated, you're already chasing the next thing, hoping it'll finally silence that feeling of being unworthy. Compliments don't penetrate. Rest feels threatening. Praise doesn't stick because deep down you've never believed it. You fear slowing down because you equate stillness with insignificance. You equate rest with laziness. You equate asking for help with being unlovable. So you hustle, not for passion but for validation. And the cruelest part? Even when you achieve everything, it never feels like enough. Because no success can compensate for the inner child who was taught that their value was conditional. Until you stop proving and start healing, you'll keep bleeding for applause in a world that's applauding your pain, not your peace. Acting overly self-sufficient to avoid, depending on others. Over-self-sufficiency isn't bravery, it's fear cloaked in strength. You move through life telling yourself, I don't need anyone. You handle things alone. You rarely ask for help. You don't lean, even when your legs shake beneath the weight. But behind that pride in independence is a heart that has learned to equate needing others with danger. This pattern almost always stems from relationships where vulnerability was punished or ignored. Maybe when you opened up, your feelings were dismissed. Maybe when you relied on someone, they abandoned you. Maybe love was only available when you were low maintenance, so you made yourself small, capable, quiet. You became the one who never asks, never demands, never breaks. Because somewhere along the way, you learned that needing someone gives them the power to hurt you. And you vowed to never let anyone have that power again. Now, even when you're surrounded by people, you feel alone. Because connection requires letting others in, and that feels like exposure. You offer help freely, but recoil when it's offered to you. You downplay your emotions. You carry pain in silence. And slowly, the world starts to believe you're unbreakable. But inside, you're tired. You're longing for someone to hold space for your struggle, not fix it, just witness it. Independence should be a strength, not a shield. And until you believe that you're worthy of support without having to earn it or shrink for it, you'll continue to suffer in silence, mistaking isolation for strength and self-protection for peace. Romanticizing toxic or unhealthy relationships. Romanticizing toxicity isn't about foolishness, it's about familiarity. When chaos is what you've known, it becomes what you seek, even when it hurts. You replay the sweet moments, the apologies, the passion, like a montage from a tragic love story. You remember the highs, you minimize the lows. You call it chemistry, fate, even soulmates. But what you're really feeling is trauma masquerading as connection. This red flag is often the echo of a childhood where love came with confusion. Maybe affection was conditional. Maybe protection was inconsistent. Maybe love and pain showed up holding hands. So your nervous system learned to associate intensity with intimacy. Emotional roller coasters became the blueprint. Now calm feels foreign. Safety feels boring. Healthy relationships make you feel disconnected, not because they're wrong, but because your nervous system is wired to seek survival, not serenity. So you chase what hurts. You forgive what should have been your last straw. You long for the ones who broke you because they match the energy you were raised in, the inconsistency, the chaos, the desperate highs that follow brutal lows. But this isn't love. It's reenactment. It's your inner child still reaching for the one who couldn't love you properly, hoping that maybe this time chaos will turn into care. Until you stop romanticizing what harmed you, you'll keep confusing being triggered with being in love. True love won't feel like war. It won't make you question your worth. It won't silence your voice. It won't burn you and call it passion. The right love will feel like peace. And when you heal, peace will no longer feel like loneliness. It'll feel like home. Believing emotional expression is weakness. Suppressing emotion isn't strength. It's survival mode frozen in time. It's the belief that showing what you feel makes you a target, that if you cry, you'll lose control, that if you rage, you'll be called unstable, that if you admit you're in pain, the world will reject you. So you smile, you stay calm, you speak in logic, not feelings, and no one sees you break. This red flag often forms in environments where emotions weren't allowed. Maybe you were told to toughen up, to quit crying, to stop being dramatic. Maybe your vulnerability was shamed, or worse, ignored. So you taught yourself to stay composed. You became emotionally bulletproof, but inside, there's a build-up, a tidal wave of unfelt sadness, anger and grief waiting for your permission to surface. Now you minimize your feelings even to yourself. You say you're fine when you're barely holding it together. You give others grace, but deny yourself the same. You think feeling deeply makes you unstable, but the truth is, it's the suppression that distorts you. You disconnect from your body. You intellectualize your pain. You cope with control, thinking if you feel less, you'll hurt less. But emotions aren't enemies. They're messengers, and when you silence them, they don't vanish, they find new ways to scream. Strength isn't about being stoic, it's about being real. And healing begins when you allow your heart to speak without shame. When you realize that tears don't make you weak, they make you human. Until then, you'll keep mistaking numbness for power and emotional honesty for fragility. But your deepest strength will always live in your ability to feel without fear. Staying busy to avoid feeling. Staying busy isn't always ambition, it's often avoidance in disguise. You fill every hour, every minute, every breath with tasks, errands, goals. On the surface, it looks like hustle. Underneath, it's fear. Fear of stillness, fear of silence, fear of what might rise if you ever truly stopped. This red flag almost always traces back to a past where emotional stillness was unsafe. Maybe your pain was dismissed. Maybe no one taught you how to feel. Maybe you learned that productivity was the only path to worth, so you became the overachiever, the reliable one, the doer. But not because it brought joy, because it kept you from sitting with the ache inside. Now rest feels dangerous. Quiet triggers anxiety. The thought of doing nothing terrifies you because in that nothingness, the emotions you've buried begin to whisper. The grief, the loneliness, the memories, the truths you've kept locked away. So instead of facing them, you keep running. You say yes to everything, you stay late, you keep moving, because movement feels like control. But the cost? Disconnection from yourself. Avoidance wears many disguises, but the moment you stop chasing, the feelings you ran from greet you with open arms, and they won't harm you. They'll heal you. They just want to be felt. The truth is, the emotions you fear won't drown you. They'll free you. But only if you're brave enough to get quiet, to get still, to stop running long enough to listen. Excessive sensitivity to perceived criticism. Excessive sensitivity to perceived criticism isn't about being fragile or overly emotional. It's the echo of a life where your worth was constantly under evaluation, where a simple suggestion or innocent remark could feel like a personal attack. When someone points out even the smallest flaw, it doesn't just feel like feedback, it stings like rejection. This hyperawareness often grows from environments where love or approval had strings attached. Perhaps you were frequently corrected or subtly compared to others. Maybe praise was only given when you performed perfectly, and mistakes were treated like failures rather than opportunities to learn. Over time, this taught you to internalize even the gentlest critique as confirmation that you're not enough. Now as an adult, you overanalyze interactions, read between the lines, replay conversations, and often assume that others are disappointed, even when they aren't. You might apologize excessively, withdraw, or shut down entirely to protect yourself from being hurt again. But beneath all of this lies a painful belief that being wrong makes you unlovable. Until that belief is healed, criticism will always feel like danger, not guidance. It's not weakness, it's a survival response. But you deserve a life where feedback feels like support, not judgment. Feeling like an outsider, everywhere. Feeling like an outsider everywhere isn't just social awkwardness, it's a deep, unshakable ache that follows you into every room you enter. It's that constant scanning of people's faces, trying to decipher whether you're truly welcome or merely tolerated. Even when you're surrounded by others, you often feel invisible, like you're watching life happen from the sidelines. This emotional exile typically begins early, in families, schools, or social groups, where you were misunderstood, excluded, or made to feel different. Perhaps you were told directly or indirectly that you didn't quite belong, too quiet, too loud, too sensitive, too something. Maybe you learned to adapt, to mirror others in hopes of acceptance, but no matter how well you blend in, the emptiness persists. Compliments bounce off, friendships feel temporary, and when someone tells you you belong, it clashes with the story you've told yourself for years, that you're fundamentally separate. Over time, this belief causes you to withdraw, creating a painful cycle of isolation. The cruel irony is that while you desperately long to connect, you also doubt your right to be truly seen. Healing this doesn't come from fitting in. It comes from learning that you never needed to earn a place. You were always worthy of one. Consistent inability to say no. A consistent inability to say no isn't a sign of generosity. It's often a subtle and deeply ingrained form of self-abandonment. Every time you agree to something that drains you, every time you nod when you want to decline, you chip away at your own boundaries. Outwardly, people may admire you for being helpful, accommodating, or dependable, but they rarely see the quiet toll it takes on you, how resentment builds, how exhaustion grows, how your own needs are pushed to the background again and again. This pattern usually forms in childhood homes where saying no was risky, where love, attention, or approval depended on how easy you were to manage. Perhaps you were praised for being the good child, the helper, the one who never caused trouble. You learned to equate compliance with love. And now, as an adult, the word no feels like a threat to your relationships, your image, your sense of safety. You fear disappointing others more than disappointing yourself. You might feel guilty, anxious, or even unsafe when you try to assert a boundary. But your yes means nothing if you're unable to say no. True kindness includes kindness to yourself. And until you learn that love doesn't require your constant sacrifice, you'll continue giving away pieces of yourself just to feel worthy. Assuming others' success means your failure. Assuming that others' success means your failure isn't just jealousy. It's rooted in a painful, unspoken belief that there's only so much joy, recognition, or validation to go around, and none of it was meant for you. When someone else reaches a milestone, gets praised, or receives love, you might smile on the outside, but inside you feel yourself shrinking. Their win feels like your loss. Not because you're unkind, but because deep down you've learned that worth is competitive and conditional. This mindset often stems from childhoods where comparison was constant, where siblings or classmates were set as the standard, and where your efforts only earned value if they outshined someone else's. You internalized the message that love and pride are finite resources, and if someone else receives them, there's less left for you. So now, as an adult, you may feel threatened by others' happiness, achievements, or growth. You may even begin to doubt your own progress, not based on its merit, but on how it stacks up to those around you. But the truth is, someone else shining doesn't dim your light. The success of others isn't proof of your inadequacy. It's proof that abundance exists. And the moment you stop seeing life as a race, you'll realize there's room for everyone, including you. Sudden, intense rage at minor provocations. Sudden, intense rage over seemingly small things isn't about a short temper. It's a deep emotional signal from a nervous system that has been holding back far too much for far too long. That unwashed dish, that slightly sharp tone, or the delayed reply, those aren't the real problem. They're just the final drop in a bucket that's been silently overflowing. This kind of rage often develops when anger wasn't allowed to be expressed safely during your upbringing. Maybe you were punished for speaking up, told your emotions were too much, or expected to stay quiet to keep the peace. So instead of expressing your frustration, you buried it. You smiled, stayed agreeable, and learned to swallow every no, every slight, every unmet need. But feelings don't disappear, they collect, they wait. And when the pressure becomes too much, they erupt, often at the worst possible time. Afterward, you might feel guilt, shame, or confusion. You wonder why something so small triggered something so big. But the truth is, the explosion wasn't about that moment. It was about all the moments before that you didn't let yourself feel. This isn't a problem of anger management. It's a problem of emotional suppression. Until you give your emotions space to breathe, they'll continue finding ways to break through, demanding to be heard in the only way they know how, loudly. Difficulty trusting others without constant reassurance. Difficulty trusting others without constant reassurance isn't just about insecurity. It's a deeply ingrained pattern rooted in emotional survival. It's not a craving for attention. It's a desperate search for stability in a world that once proved love could vanish without warning. Every "are you mad at me" isn't a plea for drama. It's a subtle echo of past relationships where silence meant punishment and distance meant emotional abandonment. Trust, for someone who's lived through unpredictable love, is like standing on a bridge that's missing planks. You want to cross it. You try to believe it's safe, but your body keeps bracing for the fall. This red flag often originates in inconsistent emotional environments. Maybe as a child, love felt conditional. One moment your parent or caregiver was affectionate, the next they were withdrawn or cold. You were left guessing, constantly scanning for mood changes, interpreting silence as danger. Over time, reassurance wasn't something nice to have. It became your only lifeline to sanity. You grew into someone who had to ask for validation, not because you're needy, but because your nervous system can't tell the difference between calm and abandonment. Even in stable relationships, peace feels suspicious. Kindness feels temporary. Silence screams louder than words. You start rereading messages, obsessing over tone, replaying interactions to search for hidden meanings. Your mind keeps saying, "They're here, for now." It's exhausting to live like this, not because you doubt their love, but because deep down your body is still waiting for the love to vanish. Until you heal the part of you that was trained to earn affection through hyperawareness, you'll keep confusing calm for coldness and ask for proof of connection, not because you don't believe in love, but because love never felt like a sure thing to begin with. Unconsciously mimicking others to be liked. Unconsciously mimicking others to be liked isn't manipulation. It's a form of silent self-erasure learned out of necessity. You're not trying to deceive anyone. You're trying to survive. It's the subtle shift in your tone to match theirs, the way your preferences morph to align with the room, how your laughter blends even when the joke falls flat. It's not about being agreeable, it's about minimizing risk. You've internalized the belief that safety comes through sameness, that being different is dangerous, and that to belong, you must first disappear. This red flag usually stems from environments where being yourself brought punishment, rejection, or ridicule. Maybe you were labeled too much, too emotional, too strange, or simply not enough. You learned to adjust. You became the chameleon, the adaptable one, the person who could match the energy of anyone, anywhere. And while people praised you for being easygoing, inside you felt like a shadow of yourself. After social interactions, you feel emotionally hungover. You wonder who you were in that conversation, what you actually believed, and whether anyone truly saw you or just the version you presented. There's a quiet tragedy in this constant shape-shifting. It steals from you slowly. You begin to fear your own authenticity, wondering if people will still like you if you stop reflecting their light and start shining your own. You've spent so long being someone others could connect with, you've forgotten how to connect with yourself. And even though you may be surrounded by people who like you, you're haunted by the question, would they stay if I stopped performing? Until you learn to stop editing yourself for acceptance, connection will always feel like a mask you can't take off. Fear of being forgotten or overlooked. The fear of being forgotten or overlooked isn't rooted in pride. It's rooted in pain. It's not about wanting to be the center of attention. It's about needing proof that you matter, that your presence is seen and your absence felt. It's the pit in your stomach when the message goes unanswered, the plans are made without you, or your name is never mentioned. You're not seeking fame or applause. You're seeking reassurance that you exist in someone else's heart, even when you're not physically in the room. This red flag is often born in silence, the silence of being emotionally neglected, of being the responsible one, the quiet one, the helper who never got helped. You may have been praised for your strength, but no one noticed your needs. You were the invisible backbone of everyone else's life. And over time, that invisibility didn't just sting. It shaped your identity. Now you overcommunicate, overgive, overextend, not for validation, but to anchor yourself in someone's memory. Because when they forget to call, forget to include you, or forget to notice, it doesn't just disappoint you. It affirms your deepest fear that you are forgettable. You may attach quickly, trying to solidify your place in others' lives before the silence comes. You may feel anxious when you're not in constant communication, interpreting distance as disinterest. And the heartbreaking part is, it's not that others don't care. It's that your inner world doesn't know how to trust that care will last. Until you heal the part of you that equated invisibility with unworthiness, you'll continue to equate attention with love and silence with abandonment. The real work isn't making others remember you. It's helping yourself believe that your presence is worthy, even when no one is watching. Avoiding emotional reflection. Avoiding emotional reflection isn't laziness or denial. It's a subconscious act of protection. It's easier to stay busy, to focus on tasks, to drown in external noise, than to sit in silence with the raw truths that live inside you. You've mastered the art of distraction because introspection feels like a storm you're not ready to weather. Looking inward feels like opening a box you locked away years ago, fearing that what's inside will break you. You tell yourself you're fine, that there's no point in digging up the past, but the truth is, the past is already living inside you, shaping your reactions, your relationships, your sense of self. This red flag often traces back to trauma or emotional neglect. Maybe you were taught that emotions were weakness, that tears made you dramatic, that talking about pain made you a burden. So instead of processing emotions, you stored them in the dark corners of your being. You became emotionally functional but internally fragmented. Now, reflection feels like vulnerability, and vulnerability feels unsafe. When people ask how you really are, you pivot, you deflect, you rationalize, because the thought of facing your emotional wounds without armor terrifies you more than continuing to ignore them. But ignoring them doesn't make them disappear. They fester. They become the silent forces that drive your overreactions, your avoidance, your unexplained sadness. Until you stop running from your inner world, your outer world will be ruled by it. Healing doesn't begin with having all the answers. It begins with having the courage to look inward without judgment. When you stop avoiding your emotional truth, you finally begin to reclaim your power from the shadows that quietly controlled you all along. Feeling exposed when being vulnerable. Feeling exposed when being vulnerable isn't a sign of emotional immaturity. It's a reflexive response to betrayal, shame, or dismissal you once endured when you dared to be real. Vulnerability, for many, doesn't feel like a bridge to connection. It feels like standing bare in a storm, praying not to be struck. Every time you express a deep feeling or speak a hard truth, your mind braces for impact. You overanalyze, over-apologize, and question if opening up was a mistake. Not because you don't value honesty, but because honesty once cost you more than it gave. This red flag is usually forged in spaces where vulnerability was met with coldness, cruelty, or emotional abandonment. Perhaps your authenticity was mocked. Maybe your openness made others uncomfortable. Maybe you were told your feelings were too much or used against you later. So you built walls. Smiles became your shield, humor your deflection, and silence your safest language. Now, when someone asks what you're feeling, your throat tightens. Your mind searches for the safe version of the truth. You share just enough to seem open, but never enough to feel exposed. The cruel irony is that vulnerability is what creates real closeness, and yet it's also what makes you feel most unsafe. So you remain emotionally distant, even from those you care about. You long for connection, but fear being truly seen. Because deep down, the scariest question isn't, will they hurt me? It's, if they see the real me, will they still stay? Until that inner fear feels seen and soothed, every moment of vulnerability will feel like an emotional cliff, one you're not sure is worth jumping off. Overpersonalizing others' actions. Overpersonalizing others' actions isn't a sign of deep empathy. It's a symptom of unhealed wounds disguising themselves as hyperawareness. It's the uneasy feeling that arises when someone responds with coldness, and your mind immediately begins crafting reasons why you must be at fault. It's the mental storm that brews from silence. Has missed message, a delayed response, a subtle shift in tone, and suddenly you're questioning your worth as if one person's behavior determines the entirety of your value. You don't just notice shifts in energy. You absorb them like emotional static clinging to your skin. A sigh becomes a silent accusation. A pause in conversation becomes a symbol of rejection. And without even realizing it, you spiral, mentally replaying interactions, scrutinizing every word, dissecting each glance, until you've rewritten the narrative into one where you're always the problem. Not because you are, but because you've lived through experiences where you had to be. This red flag often originates in childhood homes that felt emotionally volatile. Maybe you were raised by caregivers whose love felt conditional, whose moods dictated your safety. You learned not just to notice emotional shifts, but to brace for impact. Hypervigilance became a skill. Anticipating pain became your armor. And so now, even in adulthood, the smallest distance from another person feels like rejection. Their bad day becomes your failure. Their silence becomes your shame. Overpersonalizing creates a dangerous illusion that you're always responsible for how others feel, that you're somehow to blame for their storms. And in that illusion, you lose the ability to be present. You're not engaging in relationships. You're managing them. You're not feeling your own emotions. You're drowning in others' unspoken narratives. The truth is, people are allowed to have bad days, and their behavior isn't always about you. But until you learn to release the guilt you were never meant to carry, you'll keep misinterpreting silence as condemnation, and love will always feel like a fragile test you're trying to pass. Fluctuating between idealizing and devaluing others. Fluctuating between idealizing and devaluing others isn't simply emotional inconsistency, it's a trauma response born from deep, invisible wounds. You meet someone, and instantly they become everything. You pour all your hope into them, believing they'll be the exception, the safe place, the person who finally sees and stays. For a while, they're flawless in your eyes, gentle, kind, special, but then they disappoint you. They show a flaw, a moment of distance, a sign that they're human, and that pedestal you built crumbles under the weight of your expectations. Now they're cold, fake, maybe even dangerous. You question their intentions. You pull away. The shift is so sharp it feels like whiplash because you're not just reacting to their actions. You're responding to the emotional blueprint imprinted in you long ago. A blueprint shaped by people who were inconsistent with their love, whose affection you had to earn, whose presence you never trusted to last. You grew up learning that relationships were unpredictable, that safety could be lost in an instant, that to trust too much was to get hurt. So you adapted. You learned to split people into black and white, good or bad, safe or unsafe. You never had the luxury of seeing gray. Certainty became your shield. Pedestals and pits became your compass. Now, in adult relationships, you crave closeness. But when someone inevitably falls short of the perfect image, it feels like betrayal. You retreat emotionally or lash out, not because you're cruel, but because you're terrified of getting too close to something that might hurt you again. This red flag isn't about being dramatic or moody. It's about desperately trying to protect your heart in a world that taught you vulnerability was dangerous. But real connection lives in the gray areas. It requires allowing people to be flawed without making them enemies. Until you stop seeing others as either saviors or threats, you'll remain caught in a cycle of disappointment, loving hard, leaving fast, and wondering why intimacy always slips through your fingers. Tolerating disrespect to avoid abandonment. Tolerating disrespect to avoid abandonment is not a quiet act of love. It's a loud scream of fear muffled by silence. It's enduring sarcasm masked as humor. It's accepting apologies that feel more like excuses. It's telling yourself this is normal, while your soul quietly fractures under the weight of being constantly diminished. You convince yourself it's loyalty, that you're just being understanding. But beneath the patience lies a truth you're afraid to face. You're choosing disrespect because you fear being left more than you fear being hurt. This red flag grows in the shadows of relationships where love was conditional. Perhaps you were raised in environments where love had to be earned, where affection came with strings attached, or emotional abandonment was always a looming threat. You learned early on that silence was safer than speaking up, that enduring mistreatment was better than being alone, that if you were just good enough, they would finally stay. So now, when someone crosses your boundaries, you don't enforce them. You shrink. You rationalize, you internalize the disrespect and slowly start believing you deserve it. Or worse, that it's the cost of companionship. And every time you remain silent, you betray the part of you that longs to be respected, to be cherished, to be treated with basic dignity. You mistake endurance for strength. But there is no strength in silence that erodes your spirit. Love is not supposed to cost you your voice, and connection that thrives on your constant sacrifice is not love. It's dependency wrapped in fear. Until you unlearn the belief that abandonment equals worthlessness, you'll keep tolerating pain that should have never been normalized. You'll stay in places that bruise you and call it devotion. But remember, the right people will never require you to disappear in order to keep them close. Fixating on past conversations or mistakes. Fixating on past conversations or mistakes is more than overthinking. It's an emotional punishment loop disguised as reflection. You replay that one awkward comment like a broken record. You dissect every expression, every pause, every reaction like you're solving a crime. You lie awake imagining different outcomes, obsessively wondering how things could have gone differently if you had just said it better, done it right, been more perfect. And the worst part, no one else is thinking about it, but you can't stop. This red flag usually comes from a past where perfection was the price of acceptance. Maybe you were raised in households where mistakes were magnified and praise was scarce. You learned that one slip-up could mean emotional withdrawal, criticism, or shame. You internalized a toxic lesson. Mistakes make you unlovable. Now, even in adulthood, your inner critic has become your loudest voice. You scrutinize yourself far more than anyone ever does. You apologize preemptively, over-explain unnecessarily, and carry shame for things no one else even noticed. The fixation isn't about the event, it's about what it represents to you. You fear that a single flaw will expose your deepest insecurities, that you're not enough, that you're awkward, that you're fundamentally unworthy of connection. So you obsess not to understand but to control the uncontrollable, to protect yourself from rejection by replaying pain that already passed. But this cycle is not reflection. It's a self-inflicted wound that never gets a chance to heal. You're not growing from your mistakes, you're drowning in them. Experiencing imposter syndrome, even with evidence of success. Experiencing imposter syndrome, even when you've succeeded, isn't modesty. It's a silent war between your achievements and the belief that you're inherently undeserving. It's standing on the stage, receiving the award, getting the promotion and still feeling like a fraud. Like any moment now, someone will realize you're a mistake, that you're not as smart, talented, or capable as they think, that you just got lucky, that you've somehow fooled everyone. This red flag is often planted in childhood, where validation was withheld or conditional. Maybe your successes were ignored or downplayed. Maybe you were constantly pushed to do more, better, faster, taught that no matter what you achieved, it was never quite enough. Praise felt unfamiliar. Celebration felt premature. So you learned to chase excellence not for joy, but to earn worth. And when success came, it felt hollow, like the voice in your head was still whispering, "You're not really good enough." Now, even with a resume full of proof, you struggle to believe any of it matters. You over-prepare, over-analyze, and overextend. You fear being found out. Compliments make you uncomfortable. Praise makes you panic. You downplay your wins and inflate your mistakes, and worst of all, you rob yourself of the pride you've earned because some part of you still thinks it's all a fluke. But the pain of imposter syndrome isn't just in feeling unworthy. It's in constantly fighting to become someone you already are. It's in denying yourself peace, joy, and confidence because a younger version of you was never told you were enough. Until you rewrite that story, success will always feel like an accident, and you'll keep searching for a sense of belonging in rooms you already earned your place in. Disregarding your own suffering to support others. Disregarding your own suffering to support others isn't a sign of noble selflessness. It's a silent act of self-erasure, masquerading as compassion. You become the first to show up, to listen, to hold someone's pain gently in your hands while your own heart quietly bleeds. You smile, nod, and comfort others, even when your soul is shattering. The world sees you as a pillar of strength, a beacon of empathy, the one others lean on. But behind the curtain of your generosity, you're crumbling. No one sees it because you've learned to hide it so well. This pattern rarely appears out of nowhere. It often begins in a childhood where your own pain was inconvenient for others, minimized, dismissed, or eclipsed by someone else's suffering. Maybe you were called mature for your age, expected to be the peacemaker in a turbulent home, the one who stayed quiet while others erupted. You learned early that your emotions were too much, or worse, unimportant. So you buried them. And instead of receiving nurturing, you became the one who offered it. You held space for everyone as except yourself. Now your default is care. You tend to others while neglecting the wounds you've never had time to tend to. You carry the weight of everyone's emotions while silencing your own, afraid to be a burden. You feel guilt for your sadness because someone always has it worse. You minimize your struggles, downplay your heartache, and when someone finally asks, "How are you?" you smile, shrug, and change the subject. Vulnerability feels like danger, so you hide behind competence and kindness. But over time, this unbalanced giving becomes an emotional desert. You feel invisible in a room full of people you've helped. You're everyone's safe place, but no one knows how to be yours. The heartbreak is this: you made your pain so easy to ignore that now, even you forget it's there. You're drowning quietly, dressed in strength, and the more you deny your suffering, the further you drift from yourself. Inability to relax without guilt. The inability to relax without guilt isn't discipline. It's a form of internalized pressure disguised as ambition. It's the feeling that every pause is a mistake, every moment of rest is wasted, and every breath not spent working is somehow proof of failure. Even when your body aches for rest, your mind screams, "You haven't done enough." You could be lying on the couch, walking in nature, or even on a holiday, and yet inside you're fidgeting, checking tasks, calculating time. You never feel present because rest is never guilt-free. This mindset is often born in environments where productivity was idolized and rest was shamed. Maybe you were only praised when you were achieving something. Maybe laziness was treated like a sin. Perhaps the love you received was directly proportional to your output, and merely existing without doing made you feel unworthy. Over time, you internalized a dangerous idea. Rest isn't a right, it's a reward. And unless you've earned it, you don't deserve peace. Now you measure your value in output. You overwork, overdeliver, and overthink. When your body begs for a break, your inner critic becomes louder. You feel anxious when you're still, ashamed when you say no, and selfish when you prioritize your well-being. The guilt is relentless. You convince yourself that you're just being motivated, but in truth you're running, not towards success, but away from the fear of being seen as unworthy. But what if your worth isn't tied to how much you produce? What if rest isn't laziness, but an act of self-respect? The tragedy is, no matter how much you do, you never feel like you've done enough. You've become trapped in an endless chase. And even when you reach the finish line, you don't feel peace. Because the deeper wound is this: you don't believe you deserve to exist unless you're constantly proving you're right to. Equating productivity with self-worth. Equating productivity with self-worth isn't motivation, it's self-abandonment wrapped in the illusion of discipline. It's the unrelenting urge to stay busy, to always be working toward something, to never allow yourself the luxury of stillness. You don't just strive to succeed, you strive to validate your existence. Because underneath the drive is a desperate fear. If I'm not producing, am I even valuable? This belief is often seeded in childhoods where love was conditional, given when you excelled, withheld when you didn't. Maybe praise was only handed out with achievements, or perhaps you were ignored unless you were winning something. Rest wasn't safety, it was shame. Stillness wasn't presence, it was invisibility. Over time, doing became your identity, and being became a risk. Now, your internal dialogue sounds like a performance review. You measure your day and tasks completed. You feel anxious during downtime, and even your hobbies start to feel like jobs. You chase goals not for joy, but to silence the voice that says, you're not enough. And the tragedy is, no matter how many boxes you tick, the emptiness lingers. Because deep down, your self-worth is still on trial. You burn out, but call it success. You sacrifice your health in the name of purpose. But what you're really doing is bargaining, hoping that if you work hard enough, achieve enough, become enough, someone will finally say, you're worthy. But here's the truth. You already are. And until you believe that, no accomplishment will ever feel like it counts. Using self-deprecation as a defense mechanism. Using self-deprecation as a defense isn't harmless humor. It's self-protection wrapped in a joke. You laugh at yourself before anyone else gets the chance to. You call yourself a mess, dumb, too much, with a grin. Not because it's funny, but because it's safer. You disarm others by making light of your flaws, your failures, your pain, hoping that if you say it first, it'll hurt less when they do. This behavior often stems from early experiences where vulnerability led to shame. Maybe your emotions were mocked, your mistakes exaggerated, or your efforts met with ridicule. Maybe love came with conditions or criticism. You learned to beat others to the punch, to use your own insecurities as armor. Over time, humor became your survival strategy. Now it's automatic. You joke to deflect, minimize, and distract. You never let people see your real struggle. Only a caricature of it. You become likable, relatable, funny. But underneath it all, you feel invisible. Because no one really knows you. Not the raw, unfiltered, flawed, beautiful you, just the version you've wrapped in sarcasm and wit. The heartbreak is this. You think you're protecting yourself, but you're only burying your truth deeper. You've made your pain palatable, easy to digest, easy to dismiss, and in doing so, you've taught the world not to take you seriously. But you deserve more than laughter. You deserve to be seen, not for how well you joke about your wounds, but for how deeply you feel them. Overplanning as a way to feel in control. Overplanning as a way to feel in control isn't efficiency, it's fear in disguise. It's the constant need to anticipate, to prepare, to overschedule every moment of life so nothing can surprise you. You cling to calendars, routines, backup plans. You panic when things go off script. And while the world praises your organization, The truth is you're not managing your time, you're managing your anxiety. This need for control often grows in unpredictable environments. Maybe your childhood was filled with chaos, volatile moods, broken promises, or sudden losses. Maybe you had no one to rely on, so you became your own protector. You learned that spontaneity wasn't fun. It was dangerous, that letting go meant getting hurt. So now structure equals safety. But here's the cost. Your mind never rests. You overthink every possibility. You don't allow for detours, surprises, or rest. Even joyful moments feel rigid, because everything must follow the plan. And when life inevitably veers off course, you don't just feel disappointed. You feel unsafe, like everything might collapse, like you're not enough to handle the unknown. But true control doesn't come from perfect plans. It comes from resilience, the belief that even if things go wrong, you'll be okay. The heartbreak is this. In trying so hard to control life, you've forgotten how to live it. You've traded freedom for predictability, spontaneity for safety. But peace doesn't live in perfectly executed schedules. It lives in trust, in yourself, in the present, and in your ability to adapt. Fearing you're too much and not enough at the same time. This fear is like trying to breathe in two directions at once. You hold yourself back while simultaneously trying to prove your worth. It's an invisible war where you're always fighting yourself. You monitor your volume, your emotions, your energy, always wondering, is this too much? Only to be haunted by another voice asking, is this even enough? You exist in a split. One part of you wants to shine, to speak, to take up space, but the other part pulls you back, afraid your fullness might push people away. And so you twist. You become the master of shrinking in one breath and expanding in the next, never settling into who you actually are. This pattern often forms in childhood, where your sense of self became transactional. Maybe the people around you only responded warmly when you were easy to manage, quiet, agreeable, pleasant. But if you cried too loudly, expressed strong opinions, or needed attention, the warmth disappeared. Or maybe you were placed on a pedestal only when you achieved something, high grades, awards, responsibilities, but your inner world was never acknowledged. So now you live with the haunting message, to be loved, you must be edited. In relationships and friendships, this red flag becomes exhausting. You rehearse conversations before they happen. You overanalyze your tone, your timing, your presence. If someone pulls away, you assume you were too intense. If they don't notice you, you assume you weren't impressive enough. You're constantly filtering yourself through a lens of how others might receive you. And in that filtering, you lose touch with what you truly feel, want, or believe. The cruelest part? You've never actually been too much or not enough. You've simply been in environments that asked you to be less. And the longer you live under that belief, the harder it becomes to trust your own wholeness. Healing begins when you stop editing for acceptance and start expanding for yourself. Because the real tragedy isn't being misunderstood. It's never being fully seen because you've been too afraid to show up as you. Being emotionally reactive to perceived rejection. Rejection doesn't just sting, it detonates. One delayed response, one subtle shift in energy, one vague look, and suddenly your chest tightens. Panic rises. Your mind races through every interaction, replaying every word. You go from grounded to spiraling in seconds, all because something felt like rejection, even if it wasn't. And while others may tell you you're too sensitive, they don't understand. This isn't sensitivity, it's survival. It's your nervous system flinching before the pain even arrives. This kind of emotional reactivity is usually the aftershock of early emotional wounds. If you grew up in a place where love was unpredictable, where your needs were met with coldness, silence, or punishment, your brain learned that disconnection meant danger. Maybe you reached out and were ignored. Maybe affection was used as a tool, given when you performed, withdrawn when you disappointed. Over time, rejection didn't just feel hurtful. It became evidence that you were unworthy. And now even the softest hint of someone pulling away sends you back to that emotional cliff. You might find yourself shutting down, people-pleasing, withdrawing or lashing out. Not because you're irrational, but because you're terrified. Every moment of silence becomes a space your mind fills with fear. Every pause in affection confirms your deepest insecurity. I'm not wanted. And even when someone tells you they care, your heart braces for the moment that care disappears, because that's what you were taught to expect. But this pain doesn't make you unlovable. It makes you human, and it points to something sacred in you, a longing to be held, chosen, and safe. That rawness is not weakness. It's the echo of a child who needed consistent love and didn't get it. And until you tend to that part of you, not with shame but with compassion, you'll keep mistaking connection for a countdown to heartbreak. Feeling numb. When you should feel something. Emotional numbness is one of the most invisible forms of suffering. You look okay. You function. You say the right words. You respond when expected. But inside, there's nothing. Moments that should crack your heart open. Grief, joy, anger, love pass by like static. You understand them logically, but you feel disconnected from them. It's not apathy, it's not coldness. It's the after effect of being overwhelmed for too long. It's your body's last defense to shut everything down. This kind of numbness usually forms when emotional overload becomes constant and there's no safe outlet. Maybe your childhood or life experiences were filled with chaos, trauma, or emotional invalidation. Maybe you were told to toughen up, stop crying or get over it. So your nervous system adapted. It stopped letting you feel at all, because feeling meant vulnerability, and vulnerability had consequences. Now you smile when others smile, not because you feel joy, but because it's the expected response. You nod at funerals, offer condolences, but inside there's a fog. You watch the world from behind glass, unsure how to access the emotions everyone else seems to swim in. And when you try to express this, you often feel guilt. You wonder, why can't I cry like them? Why don't I feel anything? But the absence of feeling isn't failure. It's protection. Your body chose to keep you alive by numbing the flood. But survival mode isn't meant to be permanent. With safety, patience, and the right support, the emotions can begin to return. At first, they may come gently, slowly, a flicker of sadness, a wave of joy. But each one is a sign that your heart is thawing, that the armor is loosening, you're not broken, you're healing in silence, and soon that silence will give way to something real. Lack of interest in future plans or hope you used to dream. You used to imagine different versions of yourself, happy, successful, free. Now, the future feels like static. Planning tomorrow feels pointless, not because you don't care, but because caring feels like a setup for pain. You've stopped looking forward not out of laziness or failure, but because hope has slowly drained from your system. And that absence, that hollow quiet where anticipation should be, that's grief. This red flag often forms in the shadows of prolonged disappointment. When you try again and again, only to be met with betrayal, failure, or neglect, your soul starts to withdraw. You stop letting yourself get excited because excitement has always led to hurt. Maybe you gave your heart to people who didn't protect it. Maybe you fought for dreams that crumbled despite your effort. So now your internal compass just spins. No direction, no motivation, just emotional exhaustion disguised as apathy. You keep your days small, predictable. You work, rest, repeat. You avoid questions about goals or the future. And when someone else shares their dreams, a quiet ache rises in your chest, a reminder of everything you stopped allowing yourself to believe in. You tell yourself it's better this way, that wanting less means hurting less. But in truth, you miss the version of you who used to want more. This isn't a lack of ambition, it's a scar. A scar that says, I once hoped too loudly and it hurt too deeply. But healing is not about forcing yourself to dream again. It's about tending to the part of you that's afraid to. The part that needs to know hope won't be punished this time. When that part feels seen, even the smallest flicker of possibility can start to glow again. And one day, you'll notice you're not just surviving anymore, you're imagining again. And from imagination, life begins to breathe back into your soul. Constant fear that others secretly dislike you. You walk into every room with a question tucked into your chest. Do they actually like me, or are they just pretending? You smile, you laugh, you engage, but inside, you're monitoring every expression, every word, every silence. A missed text back feels like confirmation. A change in tone becomes a threat. Even when people show love, you scan it for cracks. Because deep down, you're convinced it's temporary, fragile, fake. This fear often grows from a past filled with emotional inconsistency. Maybe you were surrounded by people who praised you one day and ignored you the next. Maybe love came with strings, approval came with rules, and safety was always at risk. Or maybe the people you trusted wore masks, kind to your face, cruel behind your back, so now you don't trust stability. You expect affection to disappear. You assume you're one misstep away from being abandoned. To protect yourself, you become hyper-aware. You shrink yourself to be likable. You overthink every message. You apologize when you've done nothing wrong. You try to predict what others want and become that. But even then, the doubt doesn't leave. Because it's not about what people say. It's about what you've been taught to believe, that your place in others' hearts is always conditional. This red flag doesn't mean you're broken. It means your nervous system is stuck in defense mode. It means your past trained you to survive connection by mistrusting it. But real safety doesn't come from being perfect or agreeable. It comes from slowly learning to trust that you're allowed to be chosen as you are. That affection isn't always a performance. That people can love you without hiding knives behind their backs. And the more you heal, the quieter that voice becomes, the one that whispers, "They don't really like you." Because deep down, you'll start to believe something far more powerful. Maybe they do. Avoiding eye contact due to insecurity. Avoiding eye contact due to insecurity isn't simply about shyness. It's a quiet defense mechanism shaped by years of internalized shame. It's not just about social discomfort. It's about survival. It's about believing, deep down, that to be seen is to be exposed, and to be exposed is to be judged. That when someone meets your gaze, they aren't just looking at you, they're looking through you into the places you've kept hidden even from yourself. The eyes become too revealing, too vulnerable, too loud for someone who has spent a lifetime trying to stay small, unnoticed, or safely invisible. When someone stares too long, your instincts scream. You glance away. Your head lowers. Your voice softens. In those moments, your body doesn't lie. It remembers what it felt like to be looked at with ridicule, to be the target of scrutiny, to have your flaws pointed out like open wounds. Maybe you were ridiculed for your appearance. Maybe you were mocked for being sensitive or silenced when you tried to express yourself. Maybe you were only acknowledged when you made mistakes. Over time, your nervous system learned that attention isn't affirmation, it's a threat, so you learn to look away. During praise, you avert your eyes because you don't trust the words. Surely they're exaggerating or being polite. During conflict, your gaze drops because you're afraid that meeting their eyes will spark confrontation you aren't equipped to handle. You assume that if someone really sees you, they'll see everything you're trying to hide. The insecurity, the pain, the fear that you're not enough. You tell yourself that you're just awkward, that it's not a big deal. But in truth, you're not avoiding the person. You're avoiding the idea of being fully perceived. You're dodging the unbearable possibility that someone might see all of you. The beautiful, broken, brilliant, aching parts, and reject it anyway. Yet the price you pay is disconnection, because when you avoid eye contact, you dim your presence in the world. You lose the chance to be recognized, to be held in the eyes of another with compassion. You rob yourself of the subtle magic of being seen and still accepted. And tragically, not because you don't want that connection, but because you've convinced yourself you're unworthy of it. But you are not invisible. You never were. And healing begins the moment you realize that maybe, just maybe, your eyes were never something to hide, but something to share.